Okay.
And President Noble, you are on.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Fortunately, it's not like a broadcast countdown. I lost Rudy's square. Is he back? Oh, yes, he is. Okay.
How do we
Hi.
get,
What are we doing?
no, I'm just wondering how to get the pictures.
Oh, okay.
I'll figure it out. Good.
Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and call this study session to order. We'll go ahead and start with, and I should say that Vice President Rudy Garcia is here, Secretary Sarah Bozet is here, Board Member Sasha Anderson is here, and Board Member Dr. Carmen Gonzalez will be a little bit late. So we have 4 of us and expect a 5th in 30 minutes or so. So we will begin as ever with the Pledge of Allegiance and salute to the New Mexico flag in English and in Spanish.
Or if you'd like to.
No, please, Deputy Superintendent, I would love you to go ahead. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y la república que representa una nación bajo de Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the Zia symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo a la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México y el símbolo Zia de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent, and the acknowledgement of tribal land.
I'm happy to do that.
Sure.
We acknowledge the original people of the land, the Tesuque Pueblo people and other tribal nations, and ask them to walk with us today as we share and learn together.
Thank you, Secretary Bozet. We are now on to approval of the agenda. Superintendent, any changes needed from your perspective?
No changes tonight, President Noble.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam President, I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Secretary Bozet, for the motion. Board Member Anderson for the second. We'll go ahead and do a roll call vote on approval of the agenda. Vice President Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Bozet,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
and the President also votes yes. Will anybody let me know or speak up if we see Dr. Gonzalez join at some point, just so I don't miss her in a roll call? But we have approved the agenda. So on to introduction of interpreter. Superintendent.
Thank you, President Noble. Deputy Superintendent Romero, please.
Para servicio de traducción en español, marque 206-451-6064. A continuación, 701-802-5152 y el número de acceso es 427-7932#. Y por favor mantenga su teléfono en silencio durante la traducción.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda, our action items. We start with item A, Santa Fe County Industrial Revenue Bonds. Superintendent.
Thank you, President Noble, members of the board. Tonight, Santa Fe County Industrial Revenue Bonds will be presented by our legal counsel, Mr. Josh Granada.
Good afternoon, Madam President and board members. Let's see, excuse me for one second. So before you this afternoon, there's an item from the Santa Fe County regarding an industrial board, an industrial bond, an industrial revenue bond. Do we have Patricia Ives as a panelist? She's one of our board councils, and she was asked to be here.
Let us know.
Yes, I'm trying to promote her, and for some reason, I don't know if she's not accepting. This is Alma, Josh. I'll try it again, but she's on the attendees, but I don't know what the situation is with her.
And President Noble, may I did see Dr. Carmen Gonzalez joined us.
Thank you. I was just going to say that. I saw that too. Welcome, Dr. Gonzalez.
I think I brought her in successfully, Patricia. I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, but
I see her there.
Okay,
Welcome,
great.
Patricia Salazar Ives.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Madam President, board members, I'll have Ms. Ives take over from here. As I said, there's this item before the board tonight to see if the board would like to comment on a proposal from Santa Fe County.
Thank you, Mr. Granata, and Madam President and members of the board. It is a pleasure to be here in front of you. Mr. Granata was kind enough to send me this resolution from the Santa Fe County. And essentially it involves an industrial revenue bond that the county is proposing and considering entering into with a company by the name of Santa Fe, La Luz Holdings LLC and Santa Fe Film and Media Studios, Inc. And essentially what this is all about is that particular company is looking to have the county of Santa Fe issue revenue bonds on its behalf, basically. The bonds would be issued, and we don't know all the details of the arrangement, but essentially the property located at, I had it right here. It's a property located here in Santa Fe, 1 Santa Fe Studios Road, would essentially be purchased by the county with the intent that it would be leased to this company, and the company would eventually be purchasing or acquiring that property. It's to be used as a film studio and related projects, I guess. But the county would be issuing $16 million worth of bonds. The company would be responsible for paying all the debt service and repaying the bonds. Generally, these industrial revenue bonds, the way that they work is that the county or a municipality here in New Mexico issues these bonds on behalf of a company that really is looking for a loan at a much lower interest rate. Because the bonds are being issued by a county or a municipality, and in this case, of course, it's the county, those would be tax exempt. The interest on them would be tax exempt here in New Mexico. I don't know what the arrangement will be for the federal taxes, but I don't know that they would qualify. I'm not a federal tax expert, but nonetheless, for here in New Mexico, they would be exempt from gross receipts revenue or taxes and other property taxes. Again, what you all need to know about this is that this property is located in Santa Fe, that this property is one that normally would be taxed and which the school district would receive some of those taxes from. But because this property would be purchased by the county, it would no longer be subject to those taxes because, of course, the county is tax exempt from those property taxes. So once the county owns it and then leases it to this company, it continues to be property tax free. However, in this particular case, the county has made sure through its resolution and presumably with the arrangements that it's made with the company, that in lieu of those taxes that would normally be coming to the state through a tax vehicle, they would be coming through what's called payments in lieu of taxes, so that the school district and I guess the Santa Fe Community College would also be made whole. So you won't be losing any of your property taxes through this arrangement. And so again, just to sort of summarize it, basically the county issues these bonds, the company pays for all the debt service, repays and any other costs that the Santa Fe County incurs with regard to these. The county will own this building with the intent of leasing it to the company, and the school district will be made whole in terms of the taxes that it would otherwise be receiving. One thing that's important to mention is that the county is required to notify the school district, the community college, and anyone else who receives taxes through this property of its intent to issue these industrial revenue bonds. And that's why you all were notified about this proposed arrangement. Now, they ask for your comments, and certainly the school district can provide comments to the county whether or not you think this is a good idea. But you need to know that the county gets to do whatever it wants. It can listen to you, of course, and I'm sure it will hear whatever you have to say if you choose to make comments, but it doesn't have to do whatever you suggest or want to have done. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar-Ives. So if I heard correctly, the reason this is on our action items tonight is for us to have a little chat and then maybe send some comments to the county. It's not actually that we have any approval or other necessary action. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay.
And board, excuse me, and Board President Noble, obviously the board cannot provide comments to if the board just wants to leave the issue alone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Granata. Commissioner, you want to give us any context or?
This is coming. So I'm actually, we're just out of an investment committee meeting for all of the county's assets and CDs and so on and so forth. But as she mentioned, Ms. Ives, that is correct. So the studios that are located off of State Road 14 have come to Santa Fe County to expand the studios once again off of State Road 14. And so they're going to take $16 million of their own money, wherever they go find investors for that $16 million, and they're actually going to utilize our tax exempt status. So the county does not have any money putting into this $16 million. Once again, they're just using our tax exempt status. And so it's kind of a payment in lieu of taxes. So they're borrowing the county's, like I said, tax exemption status. So for whatever reason, if the studios go belly up, the county's tax dollars will not be affected at all, and neither will our tax rate. But if the school board as a whole would like to go forward and get public comment at our next county commission meeting, because we are going to summary title an ordinance that will actually allow for public input. And that's kind of what's on our school agenda today. If the school board as a whole wants to go say, yes, we're for it, no, we're not for it, or no comment at all, this is actually an informational item as into what Santa Fe County will be doing at the next county commission meeting.
Okay, so the bond, the IRB is not actually a done deal at the county yet.
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful. And is this an expansion of Santa Fe Studios?
Madam President, yes, it actually is an expansion of the Santa Fe Studios, which are located off of State Road 14. When you're actually going southbound, it's that big, huge buildings on the left there across the correctional facility. So yes, they're going to come in for a large studio facility for the film industry, basically.
Yeah. So, and just to make some comments, and then I'll come to board questions. As you know, this is one of the premier economic development tools that local governments have in their toolbox in order to help companies that want to expand. As has been very aptly explained, it's a way to, in essence, have these companies not have to pay property taxes. So that's a benefit to their bottom line, that they can invest in the expansion. as in this case would be Santa Fe Studios in the film industry. And they have in the past, and this may come to some of my questions later, but I'll open it up first. The issue of payment in lieu, as Ms. Salazar-Ives explained, is a way, at least in theory, to make school districts whole for the lost property tax revenue when there is, in essence, this sort of pass-through exemption done for an economic development project. Sometimes that, however we're made whole, maybe I'll just go ahead and ask the question. Ms. Salazar, you said we would be made whole, or anybody who knows, how assured are we of that? In the past, one of the last ones that I was deeply familiar with that the city of Santa Fe did, there was a lot of bitterness from a long previous school board that the payment in lieu did not actually make the district whole. So I guess my question is, how do we know we're being made whole? Do we have amounts and numbers on that?
President Noble and members of the board, that's a very good question, and certainly one that is very appropriate to ask. You know, you never have, we can't look into the future, but I think the county, as far as I can tell from the document that I received, the resolution indicates that that is going to be a condition that they're going to be placing on this company. And it's interesting because, let me just see if I can find the particular provision. It does talk about, and I don't think they use the term making anybody whole, but it does say at page 3 of the resolution, section 6, that, and again, this is something that the county would be adopting and agreeing to. And then there will be a number of different documents, including the bond documents, the lease agreement, everything else. And presumably that this language is going to be included in that. But it does say that the company intends to make a payment in lieu of taxes during such period equal to the amount of property taxes imposed by public schools and the Santa Fe Community College that would otherwise be applicable to one parcel of this property. And then it also says that they would also make a payment in lieu of taxes for the amount of property taxes imposed by public schools and the Santa Fe Community College that would otherwise be applicable to the increase in value to the other parcel that's involved in this. So they've got it in their resolution. I'm sure they will have it in their documents. And I think really that's all you can ask for. I'm not sure there would be anything else we could get from them, but I think that's a fair point and one that might be raised with the county.
Thank you very much. Other questions on this? Secretary Boze.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. I guess just to take it back one step further, because I'm not familiar with this kind of thing, if we're going to receive a payment in lieu of taxes that would be paid, what's the benefit? Why are deals done this way? And maybe that's kind of a broad general business question. Is this taxes that they're not going to have to pay annually that they're getting out of? And so the sales tax essentially from the sale of the property will receive that portion, but not the annual portion that would otherwise be paid during property taxes? Or just our portion, like the county is saying, you don't have to pay us our portion because we'll do this, but please make sure you pay the schools. That's important. I just don't understand what the benefit is of doing a sale like this.
Yeah, I can answer that. In essence, the entirety of property tax that a commercial entity has to pay is a big number. Through this mechanism, the county owns it and doesn't have to pay, and therefore it doesn't have to pay tax on its own land. But there's a clear intent to lease it to the private entity for the economic development project. But then because they found that basically schools were impacted when property taxes is not paid, that in order to make these economic development projects politically palatable, they said, we'll take the portion that the schools get of property tax, which is not the whole thing, it's just the school's portion, and pay the schools that, and which is known as the payment in lieu of taxes. So that in essence, because in doing industrial revenue bonds, I think it became clear that people were like, if you're hurting schools, we're going to oppose it. So they said, okay, well, we can make this whole big payment mostly go away if you provide this small payment to the impacted educational institutions, which clearly is us and the community college in this case. So in essence, it has reduced the amount of taxes that Santa Fe Studios or whatever the LLC would have to pay out of pocket so that they can invest in expansion is the idea. And there's a smaller amount that is given to the affected educational institutions. So therefore, economic development.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. And then that's, those taxes are from the sale of the property, or what they would, it's an estimate of what they would pay annually on property taxes.
So I think I understand your question, and it sort of goes to one, would we get it annually or in a lump sum? Because there is the sort of annual issue of property taxes, and where the money comes from that they give to the district, I don't think we care as long as the amount is right.
Right.
So is that right? Is your question sort of, would this happen annually or once?
Right. Under normal circumstances, would this be happening annually, and how are they able to estimate that to give it to us all at once, I guess?
Ms. Salazar-Ives, please.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the board, Member Bose. Generally, these deals are made in such a manner that you will receive your payments when you would otherwise have been receiving them on these property taxes. And you wouldn't be getting any other taxes that you wouldn't otherwise be receiving if this deal were not happening. In other words, if this were just private property and you were, whatever taxes you would receive on it, that's what you would be receiving through this IRB. You won't be getting anything extra or different. It is important to note, because I have seen instances where the entities that are supposed to be receiving these pilots have in fact not been receiving these pilots. And unfortunately, nobody was keeping an eye on that. I have no reason to believe that would happen here, but it's just a word of caution that you need to make sure that we know when those pilots are going to be paid, and that somebody is checking to make sure that they do get paid when they tell us they will. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Board Member Anderson.
Thank you. I have just a couple of questions. So first, if property taxes are to go up or down over this 30-year period, are we paid differing amounts based on the year, or are we paid, I know this gets back to the lump sum or annual piece, but or are we paid based on the property tax rates now?
If I may, Madam President,
Please.
I thank you, President Noble and members of the board and Member Anderson. I believe that this indicates that it also includes any increases in taxes, in the property taxes. So that's an important point, and again, a good question, and it does seem to be covered. And again, we'll just need to make sure that we stay on top of it and get what would otherwise be owed to us.
Thank you. And then just one more question, which may be Board President Noble, for you or perhaps for the superintendent. And this is a very basic question, so I hope everyone will forgive me and remember that I am very new. But so what do property taxes pay for within the district that's different from what we get from the state via the SED? Do they go into one pool for operating expenses, or are they different for capital versus operating? What are property taxes used for?
So Board Member Anderson, I would say, first of all, you shouldn't ever say that you should know the question or anything like that. The qualifications are not necessary, and we'll ask the superintendent, but it's a good question in part because it's complicated because of our equalization guarantee in New Mexico, in that we do have a different system from many places that are funded in a way more fundamentally from property taxes, but we do get a small portion of property taxes for our taxable area, our district, our land mass in the district, that sort of goes above and beyond what is taken into the equalization guarantee and the funding formula. Superintendent, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Board President Noble and Board Member Anderson. You're exactly right. So as you kind of can draw a picture, it's a big pot of money. The SEG rolls into it, but that doesn't cover all expenses. So when you're receiving the property tax, that helps pay and operate for the district. So it's a one, I guess, pot of money that is funneled or funded by different, streamlines. It could be the SEG, property taxes, revenue from other sources of rentals, for example, if somebody's using our property. So it really does help operate the district. And again, it's something that comes to one pot of money that we work with you guys on a budget that, again, that will be in an upcoming meeting once we get the SEG.
Thank you, Superintendent and Board President Noble.
Other questions, comments, thoughts on this? All right, in the interest of what I know is a meaty study session. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Vice President Garcia.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I just want to let you know that our county manager, Catherine Miller, who's actually a great financial manager throughout the state, she actually gave kudos to the school board, gave kudos to you, Madam President, for explaining what the questions were asked. And she just said that she found this very interesting because a lot of school districts, many school districts, and for those of you who may not know, she used to be the Secretary of Department of Finance and Administration, but she actually gave kudos to the Santa Fe schools, Ms. Noble, and the superintendent for exactly knowing where the money and the taxes and the payment in lieu of and all that, how that stuff works. But I just wanted to throw that out.
Thank you.
Yes.
And it's probably worth saying, given what we know about our venerable audience now, that film is a very important industry. We've recently landed on some good lists for whatever year in a row for being a favorite of the film industry. And it's been wonderful to see the investment and support over more than a decade, maybe it's closer to 2 by now, of Santa Fe County and many others in Santa Fe studios as an anchor for the film industry in this area. And we know that it's a popular career pathway, and even potential one for expansion in terms of digital media arts and all of the things that film now involves that are really cool in the computer science realm, and it's a really good industry for New Mexico. I guess I will go ahead and try and, in the interest of moving things along, make a motion that we express appreciation for Santa Fe County asking for our input on this, and that we state that our hope is that we are truly made whole, that we do get the property taxes equivalent to what increases would be over time, and that any other considerations needed for, robust partnership with the Santa Fe Public School District in this industrial revenue bond and expansion of Santa Fe studios be part of what the county and its partners consider in this going forward.
Madam Chair, I'd like to second that and just a little bit of amendment. Can we send that in a letter form to the Board of County Commissioners?
Yes, that's a friendly amendment. Thank you. I like that idea. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion, questions, tweaks from the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. Vice President Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Bozay,
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
and the president also votes yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here, Ms. Salazar Ives, and thank you, Mr. Granata and Superintendent.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, moving along to action item B, amendment to PSA with Cuddy and McCarthy for bond counsel. Superintendent.
Thank you, President Noble. Again, this is an amendment to a public service agreement with Cuddy and McCarthy for bond counsel. Mr. Josh Granata, Santa Fe Public Schools Legal Counsel.
Mr.
Madam
Granata.
President, board members, this is just a simple amendment to the contract that we have with Cuddy and McCarthy for bond counsel. And the RFP that went out, Cuddy and McCarthy sent in a proposal which ultimately was approved by the board. And in their proposal, the LLC, a group of lawyers that they're working with, is McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton. And unfortunately, they weren't included on the contract. And so we are simply amending the contract to add the group, McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton to the contract.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Vice President Garcia.
There's no increase to the contract, is that correct?
That's correct, Board Member Garcia.
Thank you. If there's no questions, I'll vote for approval.
I'll second.
Okay, we'll call that a motion rather than a vote, and a second by Secretary Bozay. Any further discussion? We'll do a roll call vote. Vice President Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Bozay,
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
and the president also votes yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving swiftly along, item C, our consent agenda, which include budget adjustments requests, contracts over $60,000, and minutes. Are there any questions or discussion from the board? And if not, is there a motion?
Board President Noble, I have a question about one of the contracts.
Go ahead, please.
Is that okay? I was just wondering, I noticed that on one of the contracts, we're decreasing social workers by 1 FTE. I didn't know what there's probably a good operational reason for that, but it just always like, whenever we're decreasing a mental health worker, like sets off something in me. So I just wanted to know what the reasoning behind decreasing that contract was.
President Noble.
Yes, please, Superintendent.
Thank you. So Board Member Anderson, that bottom one, CES, is a vendor of ours for a social worker. If we hire within the district as an employee, we want to amend that contract and decrease it with our vendor so we can absorb it through operational. So it's not so much that we're losing or not hiring somebody, but we're just moving the funds around.
That's fantastic. I figured that was the simple explanation. I just wanted to be clear. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Discussion? If not, is there a motion?
Motion to approve, Madam President, contracts over $60,000.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Motion by Vice President Garcia, second by Dr. Gonzalez. Any further discussion? We will go ahead and do a roll call vote. We'll start with Secretary Bouzet this time.
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
Vice President Garcia,
Yes.
and the president also votes yes. All right, we've approved the consent agenda. Thank you very much. Let's see, I lost my agenda. Here we go. Now we are on to presentations, the meat of our study session, and we will start with presentation A, our COVID safety protocols. Superintendent.
Board President Noble, members of the board. Tonight, I have a team with us to really present safety protocols of what we have in place, maybe some enhanced protocols if we move forward, and also, some stats, some information that you may find interesting as far as cases, vaccination rates, and so on and so forth about COVID safety. So with us tonight is going to be Deputy Superintendent Vanessa Romero and Christy Young Wagner. We also have Director of Student Wellness, Sue O'Brien, our lead nurse, district lead nurse, Anita Het. We have Dr. Neil Weaver, Chief Information Strategy Officer, and also our Human Resource Director, Mr. Howard Exer. Next slide, please. There you go. Medical updates on COVID. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of articles out there. So one of them that we reviewed with one of our teams was about the study of PCR tests from basketball players in the NBA. Again, two major concerns regarding Omicron were studied: how rapidly following infection people become infectious, and how long it hosts the Omicron hosts remain infectious. And the findings were really very similar to what we're seeing currently within the district. Infection length for Omicron cases are almost 10 days. For comparison, the Delta was about almost 11 days. So we see a slight decline there, but not much. The effect is individuals become transmissible within the first few days of the infection, with both of our viral load peaking rather than early. So again, that talks about the quarantine, isolation. We're really focusing in on the first few days of the infection and also those after the quarantine period. CDC updates as of December 27th, what we know about COVID, given that information that's always coming out and changing. This new variant, the Omicron variant, CDC is shortening and recommending the time for isolation for the public. Again, people with COVID should isolate for 5 days, and if they are symptomatic or symptoms are resolving, follow that 5 days with a proper mask. And again, as a district, we have recommended the use of 3-ply surgical masks, KN95. We even have N95 for district staff, site staff, employees throughout the district, and also our students. And all of that is on site at all district sites and schools. Again, we know it's going to change. We're trying to be very agile in it and being very cautious and watching what the numbers look like. Next slide. Anita?
Sorry about that. I couldn't find the unmute
Okay.
button. Madam President, members of the board, the PED Toolkit recently had 2 updates. The first one reduced the isolation and quarantine period from 10 days to 5 days, and we adopted that on January 24th, this past Monday. They also changed the definition, so it's no longer fully vaccinated. Now it's up to date with COVID-19 vaccinations as recommended by the CDC. So fully vaccinated is no longer just having the initial series. You have to have your booster within a certain period of time. So what that means for the quarantine requirements for individuals who are not up to date is, it used to be that someone who was fully vaccinated, they did not need to participate in quarantine if they were asymptomatic and a close contact, and they would not have to participate in surveillance testing. Now that has changed, and so we're going to have to adjust our contact tracing practices when we're communicating with close contacts. We'll have to find out where they are in their vaccination status. They also changed the test to stay days. They allowed us to pick specific days of the week for students to participate in test to stay, which hopefully will make it a little bit easier to get the students tested on their specific days, give the testing agency time to prepare for the following day for testing. And we just started that this week and it seemed to flow pretty well.
And Anita, I just want to add, we picked Thursday because elementary gets out early on Fridays. So we don't want to miss any students.
Thank you. And then they also made it so that we are not allowed, excuse me, can you go back? We're still a little bit on the second toolkit that was released on the 19th. Now only antigen tests are allowed for surveillance testing. We were using rapid PCRs initially, but now that there's a shortage nationally, only antigen tests are allowed for surveillance testing or test to stay. And they did extend the deadline for meeting the new vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination requirements to February 4th from the 17th of January.
Next slide. Thank you, Anita. Again, we received approval of our plan, our enhanced COVID safe practices plan that we submitted on October 1st. PED reviewed it and approved it on January 20th. And again, some of the things that we're going to go over is very important for our audience to hear today. It is strongly encouraged that all schools implement this plan, and it can be found on our district website under the COVID button. Now it's recommended that this plan, if it hits 3% of or more of students and staff on campus while infectious in the past 14 days. Now it's required, so those are the two words. It's encouraged and required. It is required to implement this plan if the school reaches 5% or more staff or students on campus while infectious in the past 14 days. Now, this notification comes straight from the New Mexico Public Education Department and the New Mexico Environment Department. So it's not something that we determine when it's 3% or 5%. It is something that is, we're notified by the state. Some of the options that are available for us to use: staff screenings, student screenings, universal masking outdoors. Again, you can go through this: no visitors allowed, no large gatherings, and again, lockers closed, student dismissal staggered times. What I want to make very clear is that this plan can be unique to every school, okay? Does not have to be uniformed across the district. Santa Fe High may see a different plan implemented if they reach these levels than Capitol High. Again, the last resort of this plan is to close the school. Okay, I want to make that very clear. That's not first, that is our last resort. We want to really provide an opportunity to implement this plan and these practices to prevent that. Again, this plan is located on the COVID dashboard page of our website. So if you go to our website, there'll be a link at the very bottom of that page, and our plan is listed there. And it's also, I just want to make clear that it is approved by the PED. As we go through, next slide, please. Yep. Santa Fe Public School COVID safety protocols. This is everything we have in place. We already have universal masking indoors. So a lot of our plan or options that could be enhanced, we already have in place as current protocols. Some of the things that you'll see in all schools: seating charts and in class and buses, and that really helps the contact tracing. We can identify individuals so we can expedite the contact tracing. They have hand washing and hand sanitizers. As I mentioned before, we have masks available at all district sites and school sites, and it's available for staff and students. Outdoor learning and eating, when weather permitting, of course. We've currently reduced occupancy at indoor games. So it's right now at 75% with no concession stands. So there's nobody there with an excuse to remove their mask. So we have a lot of these things in place as we're moving through the pandemic and navigating what's in front of us. We'll continue to go a little deeper in some of these issues, such as MERV 13 filters, what Deputy Superintendent Romero and her team are doing weekly. And so as we continue on, you'll see that a lot of these things are in place and we're moving forward. Again, if you move on, next slide, it's just a continuation of what we have in place: regular deep cleaning, disinfecting of facilities, buses. This one will go on the next screen. COVID response team conducts detailed contact tracing and also walkthroughs. The dashboard, again, is going to be updated to really show some transparency of what we're seeing on and off campus. Right now, it's only reflecting the positive cases while infectious on campus. So we are going to make that change. It does take time, so we can make sure we go in and program it. We've continued to have vaccination events when appropriate on campuses. We've closed drinking fountains. They are asked to use water bottles to fill. And again, we have the virtual and remote option for all grade levels at Desert Sage Academy. So if families still feel the need to stay remote, there is that option at Desert Sage Academy. Next slide, please. Deputy Superintendent Romero.
Thank you, President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. First, I want to commend Assistant Superintendents Kathy, Carl, and Michael. We've worked together to develop a checklist so that we can go in support of the principals. And the checklist is all around safety protocols. And the checklist includes our students wearing proper masks when we go into the building, into a classroom, in the hallways. Is there social distancing, of course, when appropriate and possible? Are air purifiers on in classrooms? Is their classroom spacing or desk space correctly? And at the school site, we've asked all the principals to update their marquees with just slogans and reminders of their mask wearing. When we go into buildings, it's also looking at, are hand sanitizing stations accessible and filled? We look for the signage around the building, on the floors, on the walls. We ask principals and secretaries about their mask supplies. And then we also ask about their outdoor eating spaces and if they're utilizing it. And I want to commend them because over the past 2 weeks since we came back from remote, they've been diligent about going through and walking with principals in a way to support and find out if there's any needs. And this was just a very quick snapshot. Michael Hagley was great and developed a live spreadsheet. So as we go and visit school sites, we enter in the data of how many students are wearing their masks, how many aren't, and just over the topics that I just shared, and it immediately updates. So if you look at the first week that we did this, we were super happy because 99% of our students were wearing their mask, and it's typical right now.
Sometimes this is per site?
Per site. But this is district-wide. This is at all of our 28 sites. We will have to go in and remind 1 or 2 students as we go in to their schools to put on their masks. Let's see. Social distancing, we've worked on that. It was at 80%, but we've increased that to 83%. And just having teachers and principals be more cognizant, as well as the air purifiers on in the classroom. But you can see the percentages are high. We're at, over 90% in ensuring 100% with the signages, masks being available. But at this time, I want to also give Assistant Superintendents Kathy, Carl, and Michael an opportunity to speak if I'm missing the piece.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Romero and Board President Noble, members of the board, and Superintendent Chavez. So we've been at this for a couple of weeks now, and it's really been bringing a good awareness to our site leaders as well, and just really emphasizing all of these safety protocols. Deputy Superintendent Romero mentioned the social distancing for this week, for the week of 124. We finished a couple of sites prior to this meeting, and so that's why it's 83%. So the 78% is not actually accurate because we updated that at the end of the day today based on our sites. And so or our site visits. So, but we've been very pleased. Want to add the outdoor eating, of course, has been made available at all sites now. And of course, it's always weather permitting. So the areas are made available. Today was quite cold during lunch, so it's still really a site decision. But I want to say too that for when they do have to eat indoors, the principals are doing a great job in ensuring that the indoor eating spaces are spread out as best as possible, and that students are facing the same direction. Some of the sites actually have dividers at their cafeteria tables when they have to eat inside. So they're doing what they can to ensure safety protocols. That's all I have.
And thank you, Assistant Superintendent Morano. I just want to add, we hope that principals can participate in these walkthroughs, but we all know sometimes they're teaching classes, sometimes they have additional duties. So the team, if the principal's not available, does go back and debrief with them. We don't want to take them away from picking up some of the additional responsibilities that they're having to take on during this time. So I just wanted to make sure that we added that.
And Board President Noble and members of the board, I would also add that the conversations that we have had with the principals after visiting the classrooms, and we visit 5 random classrooms every time we go to a school site and visit 5 different classrooms every time we go to a school site. The conversations we have with the principals have been very helpful in terms of looking back at the classroom, talking about, are there any opportunities to space the furniture further apart than what it's currently spaced? Are there any opportunities to increase the social distancing as we walk into the classroom? And so our criteria on this walkthrough feedback form has been very high. We're very rarely seeing students that are not wearing masks. Typically that 1% represents students who have their noses uncovered. And the social distancing, air purifiers, and classroom spaces, those percentages represent the percent of classrooms that are fully optimized in terms of furniture spacing and social distancing. And if there is any opportunity for improvement, we do mark a no on the walkthrough form. So overall, the numbers have been very, very encouraging, and with across the board, with mask wearing in particular, but also with social distancing and classroom spacing.
And Board President Noble and board members, I think this has also given us a chance to have face-to-face contact with the teachers. And so we can also get their feedback, their questions, and help them and brainstorm with them in any way we can. So these walkthroughs have been a very powerful way to connect with everybody at our sites.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. And thank you for making sure you guys are reaching out to all the sites weekly.
Thank you. And I do want to reiterate what Kathy said. It is an opportunity to show support. We never go in looking for fault. It really truly is a way for us to support our principals.
Thank you, guys. Next slide, please. Teacher shortages and substitutes, Mr. Exner.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, good evening. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties on this end. I don't believe my camera is working, but I'm happy to be with you here tonight. We're happy that we're able to participate in the governor's staff initiative supporting teachers and families. The governor herself was substituting in a kindergarten classroom at Salazar yesterday, and we have also received information from 8 additional staff and National Guard employees who are going through the process. We've assigned one of them to Aspen Community School and put that individual in touch with Principal Tina Morris. And I'm waiting for phone calls back this evening from 2 more who will be assigning to Ortiz and El Camino. And we're making those assignments based on need as recommended by the superintendent and Assistant Superintendent Romero. As you can see from the bulleted points on the slide, we've been running pretty close to 125 COVID-related staff absences daily. On Monday this week, the number of absences requiring subs was 85. 30 of those assignments were picked up, meaning the remainder of the classrooms that were unfilled were covered by teachers selling preps, doubling up classes, district employees going out to sub, internet cafes. So meeting those needs through a variety of different means. The number of substitutes throughout this week who have been picking up classes has increased slightly. So I'm real happy to see that. It's gone from 22 on Monday up to 27 today. And the number of absences, the number of unfilled classrooms has decreased a bit from 63 down to 49. So we're hopeful that all of those things will come together to put more qualified adults in front of students on a daily basis. We are also launching out with initiatives to increase the number of subs who are just reaching out to the district directly. That's in addition to the ones that are going through the governor's staff program. And we're extending offer letters, scheduling additional orientation sessions, doing everything we can to get those folks on board as quickly as possible.
And Mr. X, I just want to add, when we discussed, our subs, we had already as a district increased the sub rates. Did you want to talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. In November, we were taking a look at different incentives to get more subs working. We started the year with 110 substitutes on our roster. We've hired 40 since the school year began. So we were at 150 as of the end of last week. We had a few more come in on Monday of this week, and I believe 4 of them are already ready to be out in classrooms. So that number is increasing. The incentive for the most part was adding $20 per day for subs picking up assignments.
Thank you, Mr. Exner. Next slide, please.
Superintendent Chavez, can I add one more thing to this slide? I just, Assistant Superintendent Hagley has created a daily form for our principals to fill out, especially when, since we've had so many teachers out with COVID-related issues. And so the last couple of days, we've even seen a drop in the number of absences. But it also gives us an idea as assistant superintendents, how many are out and who's in need of substitutes and how we can support them at the district level, finding people to go help cover classes. So that will continue for the ongoing future, just so that we can continue to support our site leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Morano. Next slide, please. Again, COVID by the numbers, you see this changing daily. When you're seeing the positivity rate, New Mexico versus Santa Fe County, also within the district, we're seeing these numbers change daily. One of the things that I do want to make note of is we did see about a third of a decrease of positivities amongst students and staff when we returned from that 1 week of remote learning. So we did feel that that was very beneficial to the district. It really helped streamline some of the processes we needed to get in place, help ensure that testing was available, but also we did see a drop in cases within our school community by about a third. Next slide, please.
So this data that we're looking at here is just on the completed cases that we, the contact tracers have completed. So this data is from January 3rd through the 27th, today around noon. And of the completed cases, there were 313 students that were infectious while on campus, 317 cases that were not infectious while on campus, with a total of 630. It is important to note that we have a lot more cases that we're trying to work through. When we returned from winter break, it seemed as though we just got flooded with cases, and we're doing our best to get through them all. The number of staff infections or while they were on campus was 109, and staff testing positive but were not infectious while on campus is 46, with a total of 155. So, but we still have, let's see, where did I put my information here? There are still 267 student cases that we're working on, as well as 32 staff cases that we're working on. And that was as of noon today, because they do just keep coming in. And it seems like a big backlog, but it's not as bad as it sounds, because we're focusing on the contact tracing and getting those kids that, well, kids and staff who are close contacts. That's our focus, to do the close contact notifications and get those individuals quarantining or participating in test to stay. And then the rest of the work has to get put on a back burner until we can get to it.
Anita, can you walk us through real quick what it takes to close a case as far as the contact tracing?
Sure. Contact tracing can take a long time for every case. So it's pretty easy when they're not infectious on campus, but we still have to investigate to determine if they're infectious while they're on campus. So we have to contact the parent and do our investigation. If there are close contacts in the classroom, we have to notify every student, that every parent of the students who are considered close contacts, offer them test to stay, provide insurance or instructions on how to register for test to stay. But sometimes if the individual was not in the classroom where we could immediately determine which students are close contacts, we still have to find out if they had play dates over the weekend during their infectious period, if they were at any athletic events. We have to sometimes look at those bus rosters, look at the rosters from the athletics teams. Every case is unique, and it's a huge process to get through, but the focus is initially to get all of those close contacts notified and provided with instructions on what they're supposed to do. And then after we do all of that, then we're required to report to the public education department, fill out a report, and upload all of the close contacts as part of that. We also have to do a classroom notification, a school notification, and then put it on the dashboard. And so the school nurses have really had to take on a lot of cases. That really has become their primary focus right now, is contact tracing and getting these close contacts notified and provided instructions, and hopefully they'll participate in test to stay. But that's where the bottleneck is, because there's a breakdown of communication to do the final steps, which are getting it on the dashboard and doing that PED report, and the paperwork and the finalization. But one case can take an entire day, sometimes leading into the next day, depending on, especially now, I think, because we're so busy working on cases, that when we leave a message or a text for a parent to call us back, when they call us back, we're on the phone with another parent, or we're having parents call and ask about test results. And it's just, it's a lot of work.
And I just want to add, we don't update the dashboard until it's a completed case. And as Anita mentioned, we do try to make contact with everyone before we consider that case complete. And so sometimes it takes multiple attempts and multiple days. So just want to thank you and your team, Anita, for all the hard work and the extra responsibilities.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Next slide, please. Ms. Sue O'Brien.
Good evening, Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent. Chavez. I don't know if you recall, December 2nd, we had a new public health order come out, which required our staff to receive the booster in order to be considered, quote unquote, fully vaccinated. And so we quickly realized that we had to gather more information about our staff, our contractors, our volunteers, and our substitutes, because it required us to get information on all of those different groups of people. So our district, before break, we put out a Google form asking all of the pertinent information to get a better understanding of who is vaccinated and to what degree. So as of this morning, we pulled that information. We know that we have 2,201 employees. That includes our substitutes and part-time staff. And what we learned was that, so of the people, of those 2,201 employees, we had about 67% of them have completed their vaccination verification form. That's the one that we sent out for them before winter break. And we've kept it open, but that's as of right now. So we still have some work to do. We have 736 staff that still need to complete that form. God bless you. So our next step is to, on the 4th, which is the deadline for staff to become fully vaccinated with their booster, we're going to pull this information again, because people are filling out forms all during the day. We're going to pull that information again on February 5th to hopefully see that 736 employee group go down. Because this is the bottom line. If the 736 staff do not, and we don't have that information on them, those folks will be required to participate in surveillance testing. So I'll say that again, right? 736 of those, and that would be then including the people who are not fully vaccinated or who choose not to disclose. They would have to be part of that surveillance as well. Huge number. So we're hoping that that's not going to be the case. The associate superintendents are working with the principals to identify those people who have not completed this. We're going to then have to cross-reference across the district in case they showed up on my roster instead of maybe Amy Beal's roster, and then come up with a final list and then approach those folks to try to get them to complete that and or inform them they have to participate in surveillance testing. The good news of the people who did complete the form, the vaccination verification form, we have 96% of our staff, our employee group, are fully vaccinated in the first series. So that means they have their 2 vaccination doses and or 1 if it was Johnson & Johnson. Right now, as of this morning, 8 a.m., we have 80% of the people, again, these are people who completed the form, have their booster. They've been boosted. 3% of our employees have reported that they're not vaccinated or they choose not to disclose. So that's a high percentage. The voluntary responses. So we, like I said, the total number would be 787 faculty that could be participating in the surveillance testing. We also put out a survey because the one thing we have not been able to focus on truthfully is where are our students in their vaccination status? So this week, through the Office of Diversity and Equity in Crystal Ivada's office, we pushed out a survey to all families in hopes of getting voluntary information about our students. And what I'm seeing, we had 657 of our students surveyed to date. 91% of the students are vaccinated to date, and 30.3% of the students are boosted to date. So I think we have some positive information. We're going to continue to learn more about our students as we go along. And that's where we are in our vaccination status.
Thank you, Sue. Ms. Crystal Ibarra, did you want to add anything about the survey for students?
Yes, Superintendent, members of the board. I just wanted to make note that this survey was sent out on Tuesday, shortly after the lunch hour. We are going to be doing a second push rollout of this survey over the weekend, and then it's going to close on Tuesday right around noon. So as we close up that survey, we will do an analysis of the data and bring that back at a future board meeting.
Thank you, Crystal. Next slide, please. Ms. Sue and Anita.
So I'll go ahead and start. We just looking at the Perseus website, that is the Premier Medical Group. That's the website that they use, or the database that they use to track and communicate with families and stuff, all of the tests that have been completed. So there have been an average of 1,038 tests per week. That's including the testing at the Aspen site, which is for the symptomatic staff and students, and then surveillance testing as well. It also includes test to stay, which is part of surveillance testing. Now, some of these tests, we did find some community members have gone for testing and received tests. So this is not all representative of Santa Fe Public Schools tests. There were probably about 100 tests that we found, test results that we found on the Perseus website that were not Santa Fe Public Schools staff or students. And then for the symptomatic testing that we do at Aspen, or at the La Madera site, I prefer to call it, so people don't show up to Aspen School for testing. But anyway, once the test results are in, oh, that's what I need to share with you is there's a big delay in receiving the results of the PCR tests from that testing site. And so it's a big backlog. And so we may see another increase in numbers. However, it has been a period of time where the infectious period may have already passed. It's important to note that because these individuals who went for testing were symptomatic, they have not been on campus and they have not been spreading COVID. So it's really important that the board understands that when someone is symptomatic, they are not in school, they're at home and in isolation until they receive their positive or their results. So we don't know how many of those individuals will turn out to be positive, but we're working on that. And like I said, a negative PCR test is required to return to school or work. For symptomatic individuals. For the surveillance testing, we're using the rapid antigen tests as I mentioned earlier, those are what are required now for the surveillance testing. And currently there are 787 eligible for surveillance testing, but I'm sure that number is going to change as we get more responses to that Google form. And also, I think as we examine the immunization status, some of those folks may not be eligible to receive their booster yet. And so those ones would not be required to participate in surveillance testing. So we'll have an update on that, I'm sure, as time goes by. Sue, do you want to talk a little bit about our the challenges that we've had with Premier Medical Group?
Absolutely. Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. We have had many issues with PMG, which is the Premier Medical Group. The one that is our state vendor, who was awarded the contract to do all aspects of our testing. Anita made reference to this, and it's something that we work on every day and throughout the day to try to resolve the issues that have come up for us. Some of them have been resolved, many of them have not. And Superintendent Chavez has been right there with us in close communication with Premier Group and upper administration in the company to try to resolve these issues. I don't think we're no stranger to people waiting in line many hours for the testing at the Aspen site, to not have test results for many days. We had experience with site closures without any communication. And then one of our biggest ones was lack of tests. And of course, with all of these, it creates this domino effect. So when we didn't have the tests, when we don't have the test results, then the contact tracers obviously can't do their work. I mean, they have plenty of work, but you see the backlog, it's bottlenecked. We've, like us, they've experienced short staff to actually do the testing. And one of the biggest pieces for right now is the lack of access to the test results, and then consent to stay. So again, we are working through issues. It's a partnership, but boy, does it impact the work that we can do. And I just want to recognize the frustration for our parents and staff that have experienced a delay. The superintendent, we've made different decisions around what we know is existing, particularly if with the new quarantine of 5 days, if these folks that are waiting for their test results have met their criteria for 5-day quarantine, they are fever-free for 24 hours without fever-reducing medication, and they're asymptomatic, we're bringing them back to school, we're bringing them back to work. So I have been promised that we would receive the list of test results that we would then have to put into this, what Anita referenced as the Perseus website. That's where we can access all of the testing information. And it's through Perseus that the parents get notified of the results, by virtue of them registering for the app, in the app. So I just wanted to be really candid and open and honest about the challenges that we have. I certainly don't always want to point the finger to others, but in this case, it has been a real big challenge for us, and definitely impacts all the work that we have to do, including who shows up on our campus every day, so that we can keep people safe. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Anita.
Can I just add one more thing? I want to apologize for my yelling. My dog decided to interfere with this. But anyway, I wanted to just say the testing inconsistencies that have been happening, that has been really leading to a lot of frustration for parents and staff, I believe, is going for testing at the testing site near Aspen Community School. Because they're symptomatic, they're supposed to be receiving a PCR test. And this is one of the things that has been a real challenge, is that they'll go for testing and the staff there will provide them with an antigen test instead of a PCR test. And so then the families will have to go back and get a PCR test. And then, of course, we have a national shortage of the rapid PCR tests. So that has also been a real problem, because with the rapid tests, we can get people back to work quickly. But now they have to be sent to the lab. And there have been, there's such a huge backlog with the laboratory test results that we just have a lot of people waiting. And then in terms of the consent for tests to stay, the nursing staff have been needing to have access to the Perseus website to have administrative access to be able to look up people's test results, and also to ensure that we have the consent for the students that are participating in Test to Stay, so that when the testers go to the school, they know that there's consent, and they can just scan the QR code and get the testing done in a timely manner. So those are a couple additional challenges that I just wanted to highlight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anita. Next slide, please.
Superintendent, I know that we've gone through a lot, but Dr. Gonzalez is raising her hand, so maybe we could pause here and have that question at least. Go ahead, Dr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Superintendent Chavez, I've been told, and I just would like to get some clarity on this, that once you test positive on the PCR test, even after you no longer have, even if you have never had symptoms, you can still test positive even 5 days afterwards, 2 or 3 times afterwards. Is that correct, or?
I'll let Sue and Anita answer, but I think it's up to 90 days. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sue or Anita.
That is correct, Board Member Gonzalez. And so people who test positive, they actually are not eligible for surveillance testing for 90 days because they would most likely continue to test positive.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That clarifies. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Exler.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez, we are working with staff absences in a variety of ways. As you can see on the slide here, we're regarding the 5-day quarantine recommendation. We've been implementing that since we've returned from the remote learning. Staff is provided up to 10 days of paid administrative leave at the regular rate of pay. After that, they would use their own sick leave, and that is pertaining specifically to the employee's exposure or contracting COVID themselves. There's also leave provided if their child is ill or exposed to COVID as well. In a worst case scenario, an employee can be provided leave at 2/3 of the regular pay after the 10-day period, and they can supplement that by using 1/3 of their own sick leave time. So we have had a couple of cases that have gone to that extreme, but it's been fairly rare so far. And probably the largest case scenario would be that if a parent's child had their school or daycare closed due to COVID-related reasons, that could last up to 10 weeks. And again, that's a 2/3 pay, and they can supplement with 1/3 using their own sick leave. And all of those guidelines were originally provided through the federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which actually expired at the end of December in 2020. But our state has indicated that we are to follow that in all public schools in New Mexico through the 21-22 school year.
Great, thank you, Howard. Next slide. Dr. Weaver.
Good evening, Board President Noble, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. Thank you for allowing me to share this information. First and foremost, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the public for voting to support the education technology note. Because of this support, we've been able to build out the resources that can help to support teaching and learning regardless of the format, whether it be live and in person, whether it be remote from home, or whether it be a hybrid type format. Around internet hubs, every school has wireless coverage in the common areas. Last school year, I think we had 8 schools that had internet hubs set up within them for a large number of students, or I shouldn't say a large number, but for multiple classes worth of students to gather and participate in either video conferencing or learning through the learning management system. In addition, we have extra wireless access points. So given a request within about 24 hours, we could set up or move a wireless access point so that we could provide better coverage, better capacity within a specific school if a school so desired. In addition, current E-rate projects are being used, E-rate funds, I'm sorry, are being used in order to build out those common areas. One of the things that we really continue to focus on is student connectivity. We've really noticed that, so as an example, last week during remote learning, we had a significant number of students who came to request hotspots. And we want to continue to work on building the culture where students understand that connectivity and devices are necessary for learning always, not just during remote learning. We're using an upgraded cellular hotspot this year, and we're finding that the connectivity is working better with those. We have fired up the ENIVE study again. It started 3 weeks ago. So we will have some of that. It'll last for 6 weeks. We'll have some of that while students were in school, some of that while students were remote 100%, and then again when students are back in school. We met with Cody this morning to really talk about a marketing campaign for the Locket program so that we can get students connected to this free opportunity for basic broadband. Wi-Fi in every single school bus in the district so that students have more access to the internet while they're riding the bus. Stadium Wi-Fi in parking lots still exists. That's something that we put in place due to COVID while we're in remote learning. And again, because of the Locket, because of the initial Locket study, we are purchasing upgraded laptops and Chromebooks, and we're excited to see what the result of that is based on the ENIVE study that we're part of right now. Again, we have leveraged significantly emergency broadband benefit that will purchase both has purchased and will continue to purchase Chromebooks, hotspots, laptops for both students and for teachers.
Great, thank you, Dr. Weaver, and great
Absolutely.
Work. Next slide, please. Deputy Superintendent Wagner.
Board President Nobles, board members, superintendent. While certainly a large amount of our time is spent on response to COVID, from a facility standpoint, we focus a fair amount of our efforts on prevention and risk mitigation. And so the air quality has been a big part of our focus over the last couple of years. It's always been a focus in facilities. But improved air quality is essential to reducing risk in our facilities. PED recently announced their third round of awards to assist districts in implementing air quality standards. You can see here a fairly exhaustive list of allowable expenditures. And on the next slide, I'll just briefly review the 3 intervals of grant monies and how we have spent them to date. So we got our first round of grant monies to address air quality issues in February. We did utilize those for direct purchase of the air purifiers that Ms. Romero was mentioning earlier tonight. Round 2 was in November of 2021, and we focused on filter purchases. For this round, the latest grant award for about $244,000 will be focusing on HVAC maintenance and filter replacement. We found we have to have a much more robust replacement and maintenance schedule now that we're using higher level filters. Our standards have required our work to uptick, and we're having to bring folks on board, you saw tonight in contracts, to do that work for us. So we're very grateful for these state awards to help supplement mill levy and GeoBond and other efforts in the areas of air quality.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent. as you can see, we presented a lot of information. I hope you can see that we're doing everything we can to provide a safe learning environment for staff and students. And we're really trying to improve as we move forward. It's a learning curve that all of us are going through. We were all taught to be educators, and now we have to also be a mini Department of Health. So with that, I appreciate everybody's participation in the presentation, and we stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Superintendent and everyone. That was a lot of great information. I really appreciate the amount of work that went into pulling it all together. Questions from the board? Yes, Secretary Bouzet.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Chavez. I have a lot of questions, as you might expect from me in this regard. First, let me say,
if I may, sorry, just
No,
as
it's
a little bit of an organizing principle, maybe we can agree as a board to sort of, let Secretary Bouzet take the lead on these questions that she has, but if we have questions in the same arena, if it's amenable to you, so we don't have to go back, let's ask our questions on similar topics at the same time.
For sure.
All right,
That makes
please
perfect
go
sense.
ahead.
Thank you. So first, I really want to say thank you for all of that information, because I can tell that it was a lot. And I know just from the communications that I've had with the superintendent and his team this month, that I have no doubt that everyone is doing their very absolute best. So please know that when I'm expressing frustration, it's not directed at you guys, because there's a much bigger system here that is giving us guidelines and information, and you all are just trying to scramble and keep up with it, and it's changing constantly. So I don't put any of that responsibility on you guys per se. And so my questions are just kind of in order of the slides, but they might be answered. Can we talk a little bit more about test to stay and surveillance testing? I know that test to stay, those are people that have been identified as a close contact to a positive case. Is that regardless of vaccination status?
Anita?
Board Member Bouzet, yes, it is for unvaccinated students and staff who are close contacts to an individual that tests positive for COVID. Now, I did ask the public education department if we could open it up to vaccinated individuals who wanted to participate if they were a close contact. And Greg Frostad from PED said, yes, once the capacity of testing can handle it. So for now, it is just strictly for unvaccinated close contacts.
Okay. And then
Board Member Bouzet, may I add, Anita, also that it's for those who are infectious while on campus.
Right.
Test to stay. Okay.
And then how does that intersect or not with the surveillance testing? I know you said it's part of the surveillance testing. What is the surveillance testing program, and how does that play into things?
Secretary Bouzet, the surveillance testing is a separate, I would call it, program.
Okay.
So once a week, which we've asked PMG to open it up to more days a week, if they can handle it once a week. The people who have been identified prior to this large number, right, that I just presented this evening, people have already been engaging in what we call surveillance testing. They go to the technology site once a week on Mondays, Tuesdays if we don't have school on Mondays, and they get tested, and that's the antigen test, and then they get the results after that. So those are folks that right now, we identified in the very beginning, early stages of that. So it's separate and different, and that's at the technology site. So they come in, it's a through, and they get swabbed, and then they go to work or to school. Some of the students are participating in there as well.
Okay, but that is open regardless of vaccine status? Or that's the program that's required when staff are unvaccinated?
That is correct. The second is correct. Second
So
statement.
that's I heard mention of, you know, if parents have given consent for test to stay, that parents can't give consent for surveillance testing. That's not something that's open to students.
It is actually open to students as well. The PED has a goal of what they would like to achieve in terms of student surveillance testing, but to be honest, we haven't had a high number of parents opt their students in for the surveillance testing. But in terms of the test to stay, the reason I said it's surveillance testing is because it's serial testing. The test to stay is serial testing using antigen tests for those students and staff who have had close contact with individuals that have tested positive. But it is important to note that test to stay is really modified quarantine. And so they're still required, it's test to stay in school and school related activities. So outside of school, participants of test to stay should be quarantining.
Okay. So
Board Member Anderson, did you have something on this topic?
I did. Board Member Bose, if you're continuing on with the surveillance testing, please go ahead. But if not, I do have a question about
I was just going to say, what is the process for parents or guardians to sign their kids up for that? Is there something in place now that proactively parents could opt into, so that saves you all trouble on the back end once you've identified them as a close contact?
That's a really good question. We have not put it out there for parents to sign up for test to stay ahead of time. And that is something that I think would help tremendously. We're hoping that everyone will sign up for just to Premier Medical Group, just to set up their
like an account you have to set up.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Register so that if they need to go for testing of any kind, they've already got that taken care of.
And part of it with the issue, Secretary Bose, when parents go and opt into the test to stay program, they sometimes fill out the form for themselves. And so then we have to back up and have them edit it for their student.
Gotcha. And again, it's just for students that are not vaccinated.
Correct.
Okay. Those are the ends of my questions on test to stay. So Board Member Anderson should hop in.
Thank you. Thanks, Board President Noble, Superintendent, members of the board. I just had a question about surveillance testing. I know that there are other districts in the country who are doing like a broader surveillance program where folks can opt in regardless of vaccine status, so that the district gets a good kind of idea of, you know, which maybe asymptomatic cases or things that are popping up. I know that we're in a testing shortage right now, but I didn't know if that's like a hope or a wish or a dream somewhere that we might be able to make something like that happen at a future date.
Right. And a lot of those are just like pooled samples, right?
Right.
And Board Member Anderson, members of the board, President Noble, you know, what we're trying to do is really ensure that the testing infrastructure is there for those that need it currently. Once we can really ensure that there's not going to be a breakdown, and we've talked about this, is really expanding it. At one point, we had talked about including parents, but right now we just can't guarantee that the infrastructure would stay in place if we opened it up.
Thank you. That's my question about surveillance testing.
Okay, so then my next question, as far as the enhanced COVID protocols on that slide, there was the 3% threshold and the 5% threshold. Can you tell us where we have been in the month of January as far as those percentages, just so that we can have a sense of
Yeah, absolutely.
How close or far we are from those numbers?
Again, this is tracked by the New Mexico Public Education Department and the Environment Department. So when we get notifications, that's who sends them out. Now we received 2 notifications, but then we converted to remote learning. So we met the enhanced protocols of the 2 schools that we were notified about, and they were Carlos Gilbert and, don't want to get the second one wrong, maybe Chaparral. Is that right, Sue and Anita? Yes, she's saying yes. So
And those were at 3% or those were at 5%?
5. So when we got notification, it actually had surpassed the 3 and went straight to 5. At that point, the district went into remote learning. So we met the safety or enhanced protocols that we would have had to have implemented. Now, just to be clear, there is no specific time frame that we have to keep those protocols in place. So it's going to be a judgment call on the district staff, site staff, and also Sue and Anita with what we're seeing at that specific site.
Okay, so that's kind of in response. I mean, it's kind of a change from the rapid response that we had last year, that it's not a number, it's more in a percentage.
Right.
Okay, okay. Then I guess if we're going in order, the next question is about the approval for substitute applications. I have been posting all over social media asking for people to be substitute teachers. And I had a comment on one of my posts where someone said, I turned in that application 30 days ago and I still haven't heard anything. So are we making our best efforts? Do we know what that time frame is before someone applies to when they're approved and able to get to work?
Mr. Exner, you want to help answer that question? What I can add, Secretary Bose, President Noble, members of the board, is we have streamlined the process so we can get individuals cleared, certified, and into our classrooms in a condensed time. Mr. Exner?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. Board Member Bose. Yes, as the superintendent mentioned, we've streamlined the process. We're trying to move things through as quickly as possible. Instead of doing orientations twice a month, we're doing them weekly now. We have seen an increase in the number of applications. So thank you for your supportive efforts there. That's greatly appreciated. We sent out 9 offer letters today. And what that means is somebody completes an application, we'll do a brief interview with them and check references. If everything is good at that point, we send the offer letter. That's the signal that they are able to arrange to come in for orientation, receive the superintendent's verification form, which they bring to the PED, get their license, take care of their background check and things like that. So it's the process in hiring substitutes as designed by PED is a little bit different from hiring all other positions, where all the other positions, you take care of all those things and then come to orientation. For substitutes, they have to attend that orientation workshop first before they receive the superintendent's recommendation form. So we're doing everything we can to get those people in. As I said, 9 offer letters sent out between yesterday and today.
Okay.
And
I know
Secretary
last,
Bose, may I add? I want to make sure, Mr. Exner, that we do inform everyone that we still go through background checks. We still go through all the check marks to make sure that they are approved, that there's no red flags before we let them into our schools.
That is absolutely correct. The number 1 priority is safety of students and staff. And even the staff initiative people, the governor's initiative on supporting teachers and families, every one of those candidates does have to have a recent and clear background check, and they do have to apply and receive a substitute license before they can go into the schools. We've tried to streamline other things. We're taking into account the fact that they are currently a state employee or a National Guardsman as a way to bypass the interview and reference checks. We're taking those credentials in lieu of, but again, trying to streamline and get people into our schools as quickly as possible.
right, that makes sense. I know last year at, probably at many points, there was a real backlog of background checks at the state level. Is that still slow? Is it more normal? How long does it take to get results from a background check these days?
President Noble and Member Bose, Secretary Bose, I apologize. I would say that has improved significantly. We have a direct contact now at DPS, a wonderfully helpful woman named Charlotte, who is always willing to pick up the phone and talk to us and respond to our emails. And I think I'd say that turnaround time is working satisfactorily.
Oh, that's awesome. Good news. We'll take it where we can get it. Okay, my next question is about the dashboard.
All right, let's stick with this for a little bit. Board Member Anderson.
Yeah, if you don't mind if I just ask it's really more of a comment. I got an email from a constituent today who just said that it was a little difficult to find the actual application for the substitute license and had suggested that we might add it somewhere more prominently on the website. So I just wanted to pass that along since we're all here, save us all an email chain.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also had a couple questions on this, and I know that things have already been adapted and changed and responsive to what's happening, and I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate the comment that we're working on background checks. I don't know if we all need to send Charlotte love letters or what have you, but that's really, really great news. And I've definitely received a few emails about this. It's clearly a work in progress. The good news is people are engaged, they are trying. And I guess my comment is I hope that we can continue to be as flexible as possible in terms of how we're plugging folks in. There's substitutes, there's volunteers, there's sort of different pathways for people to come and help in the schools. And I know, we absolutely have to maintain safety and make sure that we protect our students first and foremost. But I do hope we continue to sort of stretch the boundaries on how this works and how we can get educators the support they deserve, because the other piece is a number of emails this week just about the exhaustion. And I think the extra pay to buy back planning periods and that sort of thing is helping, but it's also running people's reserves down. So really how we manage the burnout and help our staff that are working so hard to cover all the cracks, including all of you, is very much top of mind, because I really do think we're still in despite all of the improvements that we're seeing in a lot of different areas, testing notably, background checks as well, that we're still in a very fragile period and we have to be careful of burnout. And one of my questions is, are we able to use any of these folks, I don't know what to call them, if they would fall into the sub or the volunteer category, but folks that are being offered maybe through the staff, the governor's initiative or anything, to help with the contact tracing, because I'm also very concerned about our nurses and nurses' aides. And that seems like something that, especially if we had a cadre of a few committed folks, that we could get them doing. So I wonder if we're using some of this extra support for contact tracing or any other sort of creative areas you could tell us about how we're plugging folks in.
Yeah, great comments and question, President Noble, members of the board. First, we do have to be flexible. We have to be flexible and we have to be united to get through this pandemic. We understand that, the team understands that, and that's something that, we have to put our best foot forward with. As far as contact tracing, one of the first questions I ask Anita and Sue every week is, what can I do to help? What kind of assistance can I provide you? Because you're absolutely right. Sue, Anita, their team are working 7 days a week up until 9 o'clock most days. So Anita, did you want to talk about what it takes to train a contact tracer and some of the things that we're doing to provide some of the support for you?
Sure. Board President Noble and Secretary Bose, members of the board. We currently hired 2 new contact tracers, and one of them has been in training for a week and has not yet taken on any cases individually. It's a lot of it's very involved and takes a lot of training to be able to call someone and answer their questions, because there are a lot of questions and people need someone who is very knowledgeable about the content, or, you know, to be able to answer all of those questions. So it takes at least a couple weeks to get someone to be completely comfortable. Of course, I don't have the answer for that. I'll have to get back to you, but that further creates a backlog as well, because we want to be able to get through this as quickly as possible. We do have 2 volunteers that have been helping with, well, one of them has been helping with calling the close contacts using the script. Still, that does involve questions. And so when that happens, we have to stop and get those questions answered. And then someone else helping with that bottleneck. We just started with them yesterday, getting the data from the school nursing staff and putting it all on our spreadsheets so that we have all of the information that we need for our PED reports, which we have to complete for each individual case. So it's really involved. And so sometimes the training actually impacts our ability to get through the cases quickly, because we're training people as we go. So it is something that we feel a great deal of support for. And ideally, we could get people hired all at the same time so we could train them all at the same time. But, you know, nothing about any of this has been convenient.
Quite. Thank you
Madam
very
President,
much. Yeah, go ahead, Secretary Rose.
just along the line of that, you know, all of those questions that come up when you notify a close contact, do you guys have existing documents that you could provide? Are there FAQs for either, you know, you tested positive or you were identified as a close contact, just something to help cut down on that workload that you guys have to deal with?
Yes, actually, we do have handouts. We have wonderful handouts that we created actually last year and have been revising every time there is a change. As a matter of fact, our team got published in the National Association of School Nurses magazine, or whatever you want to call it anyway, because of these documents that we produced. So, but when you call someone to tell them that, you know, they have tested positive or that they're a close contact, it can be very jarring, and people can have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. And so, yes, it is helpful. We always follow up with an email, including all of the handouts. But, you know, we have to be sensitive to their needs.
Yeah, you're not getting off the phone until they're feeling a little more comfortable with the situation.
And if I may say, having done this twice now, personally, it's been wonderful. And I've found the folks that and I had a lot of questions. And the first time it was a little freaky. And, you know, the only thing I would say, everything about it was stellar, except for the fact that my child was pulled out of class without being told why. And so he was worried that somebody was hurt. He was pretty scared, and then sort of shoved it in between doors. And I know, because, you know, the person was on the phone and clearly had a lot of calls to make around this close contact as well. And I got there, and, you know, he was worried that somebody was dead or something like that, and was very freaked out. And then the second time, which was actually me checking in on a close contact that we knew had happened over the weekend and how that worked. And I would say both times it was quick, it was efficient, all the questions were answered, the protocols were clear. And the second time, to your point, Secretary Bose, I got the materials emailed to me within an hour of, you know, the phone call, probably within, you know, 20 minutes. And the materials are very clear. And, I'm sure that they would share that with you if you wanted to see them. But I have starred that email and have gone back to it a couple times on the sort of FAQ document that I was emailed, and it's been very helpful.
Cool. And kudos to the team for their recognition in the School Nurses magazine.
Thank you.
O'Brien.
Board President Noble, we also just today increased the contract of Annika Benya for more hours. To our fortune, she's going to be on with us more hours. We're trying to maintain her health and wellness too, which will be huge. Annika was one of our first contact tracers during our summer program. She's very high level of expertise, but we also, of course, on top of that, have a lot of reporting. And then we also receive support from superintendent to have somebody on board to help us once we get the surveillance information in to get all that reporting up to snuff.
Thank you. Anything else on this? Great. Secretary Boze, COVID dashboard.
All right, COVID dashboard. One of those early slides, actually, this leads into the dashboard, posted a positivity rate from the Mayo Clinic that was right around 23 or 24%, one for Santa Fe County and one for New Mexico current. And I'm curious why you're not, what the difference is between that and the New Mexico Department of Health positivity, which says our current 7-day positivity rate is 29.9% for the state, and presumably lower for the county. But that seemed like a difference in those numbers.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Secretary Boze, President Noble, members of the board. When we're pulling this information together, again, we're relying on the information we can gather at that time. So some individual reporting mechanisms or outlets could report a little bit different than what we've pulled from maybe the COVID Act or the Mayo Clinic or DOH. This is everything that we try to pull together to give a very in-depth picture of what we're seeing in New Mexico, within the county, also within a certain area. And so we've talked about 87507 within Santa Fe County as being one of the higher counties with an infection rate or a positivity rate. And so we take a look at all these numbers. So, we may see some fluctuation, but it's really us just trying to pull numbers together to really present a fuller picture.
Okay. And then leading into the dashboard, I
think Board Member Anderson had something on that.
Sorry, I just had a question.
I can't see everybody's hands. Sorry.
No. I'm sorry. Thank you, Board President Noble and Secretary Boze. Please poke me if I'm interrupting you too much. I'm sorry. Superintendent, just on that zip code point, do we know what percentage of our students reside within 87507?
Yeah, it's a very large percentage. I can't give you the exact number. We know what schools are there.
Okay.
But it does encompass a large area of our schools.
Okay.
That's the one area that we focused on when we got masks out to our sites. We wanted to make sure we covered those schools first, and then we kind of worked back through the rest of the district. So we started noticing that county or that zip code early on when it was reported out. And so we've made a very intentional effort to get the PPE supplies that's needed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Vice President Garcia, are you trying to?
Just a quick question or a quick comment. What's interesting about the zip code at my mailing address, I can get mail at 87505 or 87507. So it's just wanted to throw that out there. And 87507 is pretty much a lot of the whole South Side area, those districts in that area, but just wanted to throw that out. But as we move along, great questions. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay. The dashboard. Currently, from January 3rd to today, says 272 cases. But that is not the same as the numbers that were provided during the presentation, which says completed cases, at which point they should be reported to the dashboard. According to that slide, it should be 421 cases and not 272. So I know that Anita mentioned that there was a lag time, and I'm just curious what that looks like once something is closed out. How long before it shows up on the dashboard? So that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And to answer that, Secretary Bozay, President Noble, members of the board, it does take a lot of time. And that was one of the resources that we were going to utilize moving forward when we train an individual to report to the dashboard, because they do have to gather the information. The information we posted or presented to you tonight was coming exactly from Anita and Sue this afternoon, probably 2 hours prior to this presentation, is we wanted to give you exact numbers. But it's still, there's another step in reporting it to the dashboard, loading the data, and then having it sync and update. So we're in the process of getting all that information back on the dashboard and having it accurately reflect the cases. But just so everybody knows, you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you pointed that out. The numbers we pulled for tonight were from Sue and Anita, probably 2 hours prior to this presentation.
Okay. Do you have information about when the last time was that the dashboard was updated?
I think that varies on the case. It's updated every 15 minutes, but it depends on when that information is uploaded into the dashboard. So when the dashboard receives that information every 15 minutes after that, it updates. So, we probably just have not got to the point of uploading that new data into there at this point.
Secretary Bozay, Superintendent Chavez, if I could just add a little bit to that. That word closed case is what I meant to put on there was the cases that we know for sure were infectious on campus and were not infectious on campus. And that when I mentioned that the bottleneck is the school nurses are doing a lot of the work now, there has to be communication between that data that they have, and then someone who has access to the dashboard has to be able to update the dashboard. So the dashboard has been updated today with some of the cases that we did get finished with the contact tracers, but there is data out there that just has not been added to our master dashboard or our master spreadsheet so that we can then put that information on the dashboard. So it is our intention to get that work done, and that was the reason we focused one of the individuals that is volunteering 20 hours a week. That will be the focus of that individual, to get that dashboard updated as soon as possible.
That's super wonderful, because that's really kind of when parents are looking for the picture of how things are going. That's the resource they have. And what I see anecdotally is a lot of reports from both parents and staff saying there's more cases than are showing on the dashboard. And it's leading to a lack of trust. And that feels really, really, really important to me right now. And so what you're saying in practice makes perfect sense. But as a parent or a staff member that's in that situation and trying to weigh the risks, that's they're not as understanding of how the process is. They just need the information so they can, make the decisions that they need to make.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And part of it, and that's why I wanted Anita to walk us through what it takes to close out a case through contact tracing, is because we all hear those, we get those phone calls or those emails. I know of an individual who was positive yesterday or 2 days ago. It's not on the dashboard. Well, the case just hadn't been closed yet, because of contact tracing. So sometimes there is a delay, and it's because we want to make sure we're thorough in the contact tracing before we close out and make notification.
It's a little bit of a victim of our own success, launching the dashboard, and people like it a lot. However, then when it doesn't feel like it reflects accurately, Secretary Bozay said it very well, it is a little bit of a trust issue. And maybe if we could have an about the dashboard thing there to explain some of it. You know, this is where people are engaging a lot, and we need to build trust there. Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble, and Secretary Bose. I just had a question that's in the same vein. So you had mentioned that you were working on 267 student cases and 32 staff cases. Did I get those numbers right? Does that sound right? Or close? That are,
Those were, I think those are the off-campus.
Right, or those are the ones that I think were still being traced and, okay. Oh, I think you're on.
You're on mute. There you go.
Sorry, the age-old problem. Yes, those are the cases that are still outstanding that that they're in process. You know, many of them are in process, but not completed.
What would you say is the average age of those cases? Like how long ago were those folks diagnosed?
That's a really good point. Some of them are beyond the 2 week, you know, the 10 days or now 5 days. And so we're not focusing on some of those right now because it's past the isolation period. And so we're focusing on the newer cases so that we can focus on getting those individuals that are close contacts notified and participating in test to stay or quarantining.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, onward, Secretary Bose. You're still going? It's great.
All right. So my favorite topic of the last month is the whole quarantine situation. And again, I know that you guys are doing the best you can. There's a lot of kind of mixed messages that we're hearing. Can you confirm that the new 5-day quarantine is applicable for people who are asymptomatic? Is that correct?
The 5-day quarantine is for individuals who have had close contact with someone who tested positive and who are asymptomatic, but no, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Just if you can confirm whether the new 5-day quarantine is applicable for asymptomatic people only, because I wrote down on the next slide, symptomatic people still require a negative PCR test to return. And so those things are very, very confusing for both me and lots of other people.
Okay, thank you very much. So the quarantine is 5 days for anyone that is a close contact who has not been fully vaccinated or who has not tested positive in the last 90 days. So if you are in quarantine and you are asymptomatic through that 5 days, you can return. It's recommended that they get, if it's a student, it's recommended they get tested on day 5. And with staff, it's required that they get tested on day 5, and they can return if they were asymptomatic, they can return as long as they don't get a positive test.
Okay.
If they are symptomatic, they do have to have a negative PCR test to return.
Okay. So we haven't adjusted, at least in the district, haven't adjusted the quarantine for folks who have tested positive. This is what you're saying is these are people that were identified as close contacts who 3 months ago had to stay home for 10 days and then get a negative test to come back. No positive test.
If someone has
in this
tested
scenario.
Correct. Now, if someone has tested positive, then they isolate for 5 days and they should not return until their symptoms have improved and they've been fever-free for 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medication.
Okay.
And then they should continue to monitor for symptoms. No, that's okay.
So when do people need a negative PCR test?
They need a negative PCR test if they have been symptomatic.
Okay.
Secretary Bose and Board President Noble, do you mind if I interject with a quick
Please.
question? Thank you. Just on the 5-day quarantine for people who have tested positive and then returning, if their symptoms are improving or they're asymptomatic. I know that there's also then a recommendation to wear a mask for 5 days, and I realize we have mandatory indoor masking, but are those folks eating and drinking around other people, or is there a recommendation that they eat and drink away or do any maskless activities away from other folks?
It is recommended, Board Member Anderson, it is recommended that they wear their masks vigilantly. It does not really state clearly in the PED toolkit whether they should eat away from others. It is my recommendation, however, that they do wear their masks vigilantly and try to separate from others while they're eating, as well as it's my recommendation that they wear their masks outside as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So for my brain that thinks in like, let's look at a case study. If student A was identified as a close contact and went to get a test and tested positive, but was asymptomatic and remained asymptomatic, they could come back on day 5 and continue to wear their mask if they're unvaccinated, because if they're vaccinated, they don't have to quarantine at all. If you're a vaccinated close contact, do you still recommend people go get tested?
Yes, any close contact, it is recommended they get tested 5 days after the exposure.
Okay.
So
Bless
if
your
an
heart
individual,
for keeping track of that.
it's so complicated, and it can just morph into these different scenarios in your head. And so I understand that it's difficult for everyone. This is why it's so hard to train people because they need to have this all straight in their head, and it's hard with a sample A test scenario or whatever.
Right, for sure. And then I guess I jotted this question down when Dr. Gonzalez asked about the positive PCR tests, which I know in rare cases can continue, especially in sensitive tests, can continue to test positive for 90 days after infection. But the CDC says if you're still PCR positive at 5 days, to stay isolated for 10 days. But that after the 10-day mark, regardless of your test, you won't be infectious. Do those people still need a negative PCR test to return to work? How do you, once it's 10 days, you're fine to come back, period.
As long as you're asymptomatic, and if you were symptomatic, that your symptoms have decreased or improved, and you have been fever-free for 24 hours without the use of fever-reducing medication.
Okay. Cool. That's actually all of my questions.
Thank you. That was a lot. Board Member Anderson.
I have more, Board President Noble, if you don't mind.
Please keep going. I've got more too.
I don't have a lot more. In fact, I maybe just have one more. But so of the 736 staff who have yet to complete the form, that's a little jarring for me, as I'm sure it is for you. But just a question: are these mostly folks who have completed the form, say at the beginning of the year? They're either not vaccinated or they've gotten their 2 vaccines and now we're waiting on them because of the booster? Or is there a possibility, albeit slight, that say 33% of these folks, I think it was 33% of the employees hadn't completed it, that they could all just be completely unvaccinated? Is there, I was having a hard time meshing those scenarios together.
Understood. Board President Noble, Board Member Anderson, we don't know. So that's why it is alarming. So that 736 out of the employee group, those are the folks that just have not completed the form. So we have no information on them. So this is not something we gave to them twice. So it was a one-time Google form. I don't know if you want to call it a survey, where we collected that information. So if somebody at the time, like myself, had the 2 doses and I was waiting for my booster, I then had to go in and upload the information again once I got my booster. So we do have some duplicates, which we haven't even addressed yet. But our first layer is to get everybody to complete that form so that we do have a real strong understanding of what the percentages are. That's the, it's just important to know. This is data that we have based on people filling it out. So it could be very positive. I mean, looking at the data, with the percentage of people who are fully vaccinated, people who have not, maybe partially vaccinated, which we haven't even talked about tonight, very few people. So I find that as a positive. So our first go around was to get everyone to fill out the form. The next go around is to identify those who did not fill out the form by school site, by department. So that's what we're engaging in right now. Once we identify who those people are, either the site principal or the department director, like I've already done that, reach out to the people that should be in my department who I should see on my spreadsheet. So everybody, Jen Jefferson helped us to get basically the roster for each school and department to the individual supervisors. So once we get a list of those people, we have been, communicating with them about please complete the form. So for me, the last deadline for us would be February 4th. What happened was we would have probably had better, I would say, more information. But if you recall, the state pushed out the deadline. It was a January 17th deadline for everyone to have their booster. Then it became February 4th. So February 5th, we're going to go through the same activity we did for this data and pull, who then from, the time that we pulled it at 8 o'clock this morning to February 5th, and get a more accurate number, hopefully. That's our intention. And then compare what we're going to have to do. It's going to be an interesting task, is to compare the rosters of, across the district, across school sites and departments, because some people filled it out. So there are these anomalies where somebody who filled it out may have put themselves at a school site, but they put my department. So we've got to work through those idiosyncrasies is the best way I could describe it, how people filled it out. So that's going to be a task. And then from there, then we should be able to discern who truly needs to go for surveillance testing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Unfortunately. Yes. Yeah.
Madam President.
Go ahead.
Madam President, just along those lines, I'm so glad that Board Member Anderson asked that question, because I think that that's really important. And maybe this isn't what she was asking, but what I take from that question is I'm a little bit confused, because at the beginning of the school year, we were all given numbers of, in the low 90s as far as staff vaccination rates. And so I don't I don't quite understand how that transfers over to these numbers that we're seeing now. Like, obviously there was some data gathered at the beginning of the school year, which I think is why Board Member Anderson said, did you ask this question twice? We were given really high numbers a few months ago, and now we don't have high numbers. And I don't understand how that happened.
Right. We actually, what we did was I don't know a best way to say it, but we threw the net back out. Number one, because we then had to account for volunteers, substitutes, and contractors. So the initial piece was those who were, fully vaccinated at the time. But remember, the definition of fully vaccinated changed, because of the number that we have of the people that actually, like I said, completed the form, we have 96% of our staff, the employees, 96 are fully vaccinated in those first doses, the first 2 doses. So it's the boosted number that we need to work on. So the other ones, Board Member Bose, that fill out the form, once we get a better sense of those 736 people, employees, that the percentage could be just right back up there. It's just, we just don't know that right now. So.
And are volunteers and subs also in that?
In the
people who you're expecting to fill out this documentation. Like, is that some of?
Yes, so employees. So, but the number that we got in terms of the 736 are staff. They're employees. So that's not the volunteers. That's the employee group that we need to work with. But we did have to, like I said, cast our net after the health order to include volunteers, contractors, substitutes with those employees, which is huge.
Yeah, I also wrote down, and I appreciate Board Member Anderson bringing this up. I had just questions here. It's pretty clear we need better data on our vaccination rates. And so whatever we can do to emphasize that, I know it's going to be a moving target. We have benefited, and the folks who are vaccinated and are on it are probably going to be the first to fill out the survey. And so yeah, it is something I really look forward to an update on. And the more we can know what's going on and have that accurate information, I'm sure the better we can do. But that was definitely an area of concern for me. Board Member Anderson.
Thank you. Just one more thing. I just wanted to say, and thank you, Board President Noble. I just wanted to say, Ms. O'Brien, thank you so much for recognizing the frustration that people are feeling particularly with testing. I know I've heard, as I'm sure you've heard 10 times more, a number of folks who were symptomatic and went to the La Madera site and were given an antigen test and, therefore couldn't return to school, or maybe did return to school with the wrong test, or, lots of different scenarios. So I really appreciate, and I hope that folks are watching tonight and hear that, because I think it puts a pin in what's really important, which is the trust and respect of the folks that we work with.
Board Member Anderson, may I add, that's one of the topics that we're working on with PMG. That's almost a daily conversation we have with them. And so that's something that we recognize, and we're really trying to get that ironed out with our vendor.
I do not envy you. Thank you for doing that work.
So on that, I guess I sort of wonder, and I appreciate all that work, and I know it's hard, and I've been to that site, and honestly, they've been great, but then I forget even the precise scenario I presented, and they said, we have to make a phone call and go check and clarify. And, I know lots of people, and then they, because I did get clear guidance on the close contact, and then we, had to go get a PCR test, even though my son was asymptomatic on day 5. All of that was great. And we went there, and then they said, we're only doing PCR tests now. There was too much confusion about antigen tests. So now we're only, anyway. So, I've been there a lot. And they've been at least very transparent about what's going on with them. But it was clear that, for some of those frontline staff members, they could use some clearer guidance on what was supposed to happen. And it sounds like that was. But my question is really, and I know it's a challenge, and I also appreciate, Ms. O'Brien, you recognizing that and just saying that up front. Why are we only working with Premier Medical Group? I mean, I just sort of wonder, in the spirit of sort of having a more robust and redundant system, if we might think about other contractors as well.
Superintendent Chavez, I don't know if you want me to respond to that.
Go ahead. Yeah, and I have something to add that was announced earlier today, so go ahead.
Okay, so it might be an update from what I'm going to share. So this is a state contract. Earlier on, Anita and I met with a lab company, Beechtree, and because we thought perhaps that like I said, it was earlier on that we might, as a district, have an option who we choose. But we were informed that we needed to stay with PMG. It was a state contract. And so, and I kid you not, 2, 3, 4 times a day, it could be more, that we're on the phone with PMG, with the Department of Health, with Dr. Massaro. He's been part of that. And now we have the Department of Health, we have a new health advocate who's been helping us along. So it's something, because this is what we were told to do. This is what we were required to do, is follow the contract per the state.
Yeah, and
Larry, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sue. And this morning it was announced that they are vetting a couple of additional vendors to provide options to districts. So right now, PMG is our option until we get those clearance from those other 2 vendors. So we've been asking President Noble, we've been exploring. It just hasn't been an option at this point.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Board President Noble. I wanted you to know that I wrote down "what can we do -PMG" in all caps on my notes. So thank you for asking.
I do want to note, we're not the only district going through this. As you read in the paper, Rio Rancho Public Schools closed their 2 large high schools because of testing issues with the same company. So we're not unique to these disruptions or lack of capacity. We're seeing this statewide.
Board Member Anderson, is that the end of your list of questions?
Yes, that is the end of my list. Thank you.
Okay. I had 2 areas that weren't covered. Actually, it's not as much questions as comments. I really appreciate the update from Dr. Weaver and all that's going on, because we cannot forget the importance of technology access. And I am just so happy that we continue to push to fill the digital, if not divides, the gaps or donut holes or, sinkholes, whatever they are, for our students who need that access and need that support. I'm really glad to hear we're starting up and sort of imagine this giant machinery, which is so the opposite of what we're actually doing when we start up that gathering that data again, but very glad to know that. And just one small suggestion, which is, I think it's as we're going to market the Lock It program more. And this is just a hope in all our communications. We need to say what it is rather than the name of the thing, just because Lockett, and I know sometimes because we all have so much information and things become so familiar, but Lockett doesn't mean anything to the outside world. So if we can increasingly just, thank you, Dr. Weaver, not call things what they're named, but call things what they are. And, the superintendent has heard me on this particular point about peach jar, and as has Mr. Dinarski, because I honestly, I would say that Secretary Bouzet and Board Member Anderson are good parents. I'm a terrible parent. And if you can get through to me, it's been clear, because I am hard to communicate with as a parent. And so I use myself as a test case. And when somebody's like, it's on peach jar, I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. But now I figured it out. It's a flyer system. But we all have to be brought along in that regard. And going back to something that was sort of near the beginning of the presentation that we didn't hit. I love the description, and I appreciate Deputy Superintendent Romero talking us through what that checklist was, and sort of the spot checking. And just to say that I hope that, it's not just about when district staff come on site, that the schools are encouraged to look at that checklist regularly on their own. I think it's probably great to do is sort of and both, internal vigilance around that, as well as, district folks coming in and verifying. I hope that we are also providing support for something I've heard, and it's really complicated, and I do not pretend that we should centralize or have any better judgment than teachers and aides and principals on site. But if there needs to be discipline and backup from the district when kids aren't masking, and if kids are refusing to mask, I hope that we have some backbone around that. And it's something I've heard not recently, truthfully, a little bit more before, but that there was frustration that if a kid isn't masking and has been told multiple times that there isn't really a plan for what to do there. So I hope that teachers have that backup, that principals have that in their toolkit and can do something if kids are refusing to mask. I already talked about buying the teacher preps and the exhaustion piece. Oh, and I think maybe Mr. Morano said this, but the site decisions about eating outside and that sort of thing. And just to say that I think that's absolutely right. And again, I don't pretend that we at the board, or even you professionals at the district, could do better than the principals and the teachers who are at the school sites. I guess my hope is that we can have even more flexibility than that there can be variable options. Obviously, we heard at some point about kids who were asked to eat outside who didn't want to, and whether there was a road paving and asphalt and air quality issues outside, all of that sort of thing. And then, also with recess and when it's colder, I've heard a number of stories of kids who are not allowed to go outside for recess or to eat outside when it's cold. And again, I don't pretend to know better, but I hope that we're encouraging principals and site folks to make those options available. Dr. Gonzalez and I sat through a lot of the Senate education hearing in the same room together yesterday, and which included a bill about outdoor learning, which was great to hear all of the comments and all of the, I think Senator Hemphill, who was sponsoring it, talked about a higher brain space that you get into, and a lot of the evidence about the benefits of outdoor learning. And I just really hope that we are making that option available. I hope that we are letting principals know, and if we need to revisit the board policy on recess should never be taken away. And there's a board policy on that, and previous boards have been very clear on this. And for kids, even on snowy, muddy days, we need to let them outside. We need to not be so preoccupied with mud or cold. You know, if a child doesn't want to go outside or doesn't have a great jacket and is cold, you know, I hope we have options to stay inside. But I really want to emphasize that we need those options available. And for many, many children, it's really important for those outside options to still be there. The legislature is talking about outdoor learning, lots of other people too. You know, let's not forget this for whatever reason, whether it be cold or mud. And I don't understand some of this. And sometimes when these things happen and when recess is taken away as a punishment, which again is antithetical to a board policy, this stuff is just soul crushing to hear. So I hope we can find a balance there in terms of offering outside and inside options, depending on what is appropriate for particular kids at particular school sites. And goodness, we cannot be afraid of mud. Anyway, so that's
Madam
all.
President.
Yes, Secretary Bozay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to echo support for that statement that there were several times before winter break where I heard from my kids, well, the weather was bad, so we had to eat inside, and then everyone's inside and it was too crowded, and they feel very uncomfortable with that. And I know on the opposite end of the spectrum are people that don't want their kids eating outside when it's cold. And that's totally reasonable. But again, just having the options there, like we're talking to our kids about that. Our kids know maybe kids just want to choose what they want that day, but let's keep as many options open as possible. And then also on the teacher burnout aspect, I thought that this would be a good moment to again recognize the Wellness Mondays activities that teachers can participate, teachers, staff can participate in the afternoon. And again, another big shout out to Kathy Kasaust for helping spearhead that, and the wonderful members of our community that are making that possible. And I hope that teachers and staff take advantage of it, because while it doesn't change your day-to-day duties and how overwhelmed and stressed you are, it can help give you the tools and ability to cope with how hard everything is right now, and we all need that. So thank you again for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And I think, you know, what Secretary Bozay points to is a great idea. Of course, it's a staffing issue to have different populations of kids inside and outside for lunchtime. But again, hopefully, as we get more volunteers and, you know, some of this support in, maybe we can do some of that. And, you know you're all working on it very, very hard. Mr. Granata, you've raised your hand. Or is that a...
Board President Noble, members of the board. I just want to quickly bring up a couple items that are tangentially related to the COVID topic. And that is what's going on with the legislature right now. And I just wanted to, let the board know about some of the priorities that we have, which address, COVID in our schools right now. We've requested $397,000 for HVAC upgrades. Deputy Superintendent Christy Wagner talked about the need for upgrading these systems. And so in order to do so, we're requesting nearly $400,000 from the legislature in order to make these systems better. And then another one that we are also asking for is $560,000 in order to improve and build out outdoor learning spaces and outdoor dining. And so a lot of what we're talking about tonight with regard to COVID, we're seeking money from the legislature in order to better address these issues. And so I just wanted to bring these two items up as we're in the session right now.
Thank you very much. That's good stuff. And a good opportunity to say I want to appreciate Deputy Superintendent Christy Yonda Wagner and all of the work that her team has done, because honestly, the Santa Fe Public Schools were on this HVAC thing long before it was even in the conversation. And we've done so much good work and obviously are continuing to look for investment in that and upgrade that. So really appreciate all that has gone into that, and clearly understanding that we need to change the filters more often is part of it. And that's staffing issues and, you know, all the things. Okay, anything else from the board on this? Yes, Vice President Garcia.
Thank you. I don't know where to start, but very excellent questions, and my questions were answered, and many, many more questions were answered. But like I said, very great questions, and what a great presentation. Awesome job to the superintendent and your entire team. You guys are on it, and I know this is a huge moving target. I have talked to several of employees that have kids in the district at Santa Fe County, and they are very impressed as into what the school district is doing. And keep up the good work. And just my heart goes out to all your staff that are working on this stuff, because there's other stuff that is happening during the district and just dealing with COVID. You guys are doing a great job, and thank you for what you do, superintendent, and your entire team, and great, awesome questions by the other board members. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President Garcia. All right. How are we feeling? Do we need a break? Gino's ready to go on our next study session presentation. If nobody's calling for a break, I say we just keep plowing through. All right. We are moving on. Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Thank you, Ms. Hett. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your work and all of that on the, there's a little, yes, lots of clapping on that presentation and really everything that is behind it that we touched upon there. Vice President Garcia said it very well. So now we only have redistricting and reimagining our public schools next on our agenda tonight. And we'll start with, just to frame this from my perspective as a point of privilege, and I've thought, as I think you all know a lot about this, but really having dug into and read the presentation again on redistricting that we'll be hearing from our board counsel, Gino Zamora and others, I'm thinking about this as sort of, you know, steps in a process, and the redistricting that we need to do by law because of the decennial census is really an exercise in numbers. And to be very clear, it is not school districts, it is our elected districts. It is districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that board members come from. That's what we have to redistrict by law in the decennial census. So I think we can do this according to the excellent best practices that Mr. Zamora will outline for us. I had the advantage of sitting through an hour-long version of what will hopefully be a condensed version of this tonight. And, you know, really we can do redistricting first, and it's a good way for us to get our arms around the quantitative data in our district, the numbers, the populations, the demographics. We can then use that as a stepping stone for the reimagining exercise, which needs to be way more community involved and creative and innovative. So just to call out that I think there are a couple steps in this process. The first one that we need to tackle, especially while our whole district, and as is evidenced by the previous presentation, is under a COVID spike and all of the things that they have to do, it makes sense to sort of keep the redistricting as simple, as numerically led, and as quantitative as possible. And then hopefully we can move on to the reimagining process when we get a little bit more breathing room from this pandemic and a little bit more sunlight and warmth from the rotation of the earth, and some other things. So that's a frame for what it's worth. And now I'll go ahead and say, Superintendent, do you want to kick us off for this next presentation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Board President Noble, members of the board. With us tonight is Mr. Gino Zamora of Ortiz and Zamora Law Firm. Also with us is our General Counsel, Santa Fe Public School General Counsel, Mr. Josh Granada, and also our Santa Fe Public School Deputy Superintendent, Ms. Christy Yanda Wagner. Mr. Zamora.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent, President Noble, board members. I will do my best to be prompt and keep this what it is a primer. Are we able to show the presentation? It just disappeared. Otherwise, I can share screen. I'm fine sharing screen.
I have it on.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's keep this as a primer. I think President Noble gave us really good context. All we're discussing tonight are the needs to update the boundary lines for the 5 board member districts, where the 5 board members are elected from. So a quick overview, I'm gonna thumbnail sketch redistricting lines, laws, timelines, fiscal considerations, principles of redistricting, and an overview, just a brief overview of the census data here for us locally. For some of us sort of data nerds, I love this stuff. I love demographics every 10 years. For background, I've done redistricting with the legislature way back in 2001 with the city, with this school district previously, and then in private practice for several school districts. Next page. Okay. To prepare for going through speedily, I just have some good headlines on these. For SFPS, redistricting occurs in this calendar year. By statute, no earlier than the 1st, no later than the 31st. And I do leave the legal citations there throughout the presentation, but I'm not going to read through them in the interest of time. Next slide. The individual board member districts are required by law, formerly in case law and now in statute, to be nearly equal in population. All 5 districts need to be nearly equal in population within 5% of the mean. So for example, if within our school district boundaries, we had 100,000 total population, an even number, ideally there would be 20,000 per member district, and we have flexibility of plus or minus 1,000. The reason for that flexibility, you can't get it perfectly. You can't divide a house in half, and you may need to go around neighborhoods, etc. Next slide, please. Okay, important dates for this redistricting process. Last year, the census data collection was complete. It was a little later than previous decades, only because there was so much litigation over what was going to be counted. In fall of 2021, the data was delivered to the state from the Census Bureau. Of course, we had school board elections in November 2021 based on the existing district lines. And then, of course, as I mentioned, redistricting will occur during this calendar year, must be complete during this calendar year, in time for all the deadlines that occur in the November 2023 school board elections. Next slide, please. So these, I'm just going to top line again, what the board should be considering, whether it's in their 2021-22 budget or in their 22-23 budget, the board should be budgeting for redistricting consulting services. There are professionals who do this for a living. They just finished doing this with the legislature. Several consultants were involved there. And so there's a procurement process, there's contracting, requests for information, et cetera. That the range of pricing is 20 to 30,000 typically, but it can dip lower, not very usually, but it can go higher, again, depending on these cost considerations of how many maps you're seeking, how many public sessions and meetings to review maps, and I guess that's the number of revisions to maps. And I'll speak to that very briefly and then be able to move on. One thing that I think about in the meetings, I've seen anything from we're going to have meetings at central office 1, 2, or 3 times before the board for the initial drafts of maps, maybe the introduction and the demographic information, and then additional meetings in that central location for the public to attend and view. In non-COVID years, we have had maybe physical meetings in each physical district for the constituencies to come and speak and give their local feedback on some of the factors that I'm going to discuss in future slides. So that's something to think about. Other cost considerations are, sometimes there can be controversy, and I'll share screen at the end of this to show you how maps can create controversy. You can still meet all the ideals, but the main controversy is when new boundaries contain 2 or more existing board members. And then it sort of pushes board members into the same district and having to run against each other in future elections. Combining new constituencies or dramatically different areas if your overall boundaries expanded, if for schools, if new schools open in new areas, or if there are dramatic changes such as newly constructed neighborhoods. So that can sort of contribute to how many meetings you need, how much data analysis you need. Feel free to ask questions along the line. Otherwise, I'm going to move to the next slide.
I have a question, Mr. Zamora.
Yes.
It's Rudy.
Board Member Garcia.
So let's just take, for example, the southern part of the city there, all the new subdivision of Los Solares development. And so how do we go about projecting, because the census hasn't even counted anybody in this new, whatever, let's just say 7,000, 8,000 lot subdivision or subdivided area that's up for approval. How do we go about doing that?
Sure. So first of all, President Noble, Board Member Garcia, first, something to keep in mind is that we go based on the data as counted, not as projected moving forward, number one. Number two, that count was through 2020. So a lot of the development on the south side, like Las Soletas, for example, there would be a high count from that area. And I hate to say it this way, you're going to have more of an accurate count in well-established developments than you are going to have in sporadic growth throughout rural areas. So, but the count, the bottom lines of my answer are the count is through December of 2020. And is included, and redistricting is not based on projections, but only on current counts. Okay, so the principles of redistricting, and by the way, there's a lot of attribution to Research and Polling Inc. That tends to be the consultant I work with most often throughout the state, and that I've shared clients with probably over 21 years now. So there's some attribution here. I get a lot of my information that you'll see coming from them. But the principles are equal population, as we've discussed, preserving minority voting rights, not diluting that, spreading it out, minimizing it, compactness of the district itself. And when I share screen at the end, I will show you your existing districts and how they really demonstrate compactness. Contiguity, that a single member district be contiguous. You can't have a checkerboard scattered throughout your area, your boundaries. And communities of interest. So you consider communities of interest, something that neighborhoods may share, or areas of town culturally or developmentally may share. So communities of interest. You try as best as possible to recognize all of those items on this page. Next slide.
Madam President, Mr. Zamora, Gino.
Sir.
So the school district boundaries are based off of population. So does the precinct have to do with school districts as a local governmental district adjustment?
Sure. President Noble.
So the county commission, so what we looked at is we actually looked at different precincts and whether this precinct actually, or this commission district needed to gain or lose population. The way we went about it is looking at different precincts that are adjacent to the existing.
Sure. So President Noble, Board Member Garcia.
He likes to be called Vice President.
Okay, Vice President Garcia. President Noble, Vice President Garcia. One thing to keep in mind in this, our school district boundaries are static. They're not going to shift for the overall school district, Santa Fe Public Schools. Those are very rigid. As the population shifts, you do look for distinct places to shift boundaries to, and that can be precincts, it can be roads, it can be rivers, it can be several items like that. But very often, precinct boundaries will assist in and be relied upon in the redistricting process. Okay. So on this slide, very brief, it's more informational. What's counted in a census, you're looking at adults, children, citizens, college students in dorms, even foreign students get counted, documented and undocumented immigrants, and prisoners within these boundaries to get the overall population within a geographic area. And then once you get that data, what you will see from a consultant later this year when the consultant comes in is where is the population growth? Where's the population decline? Are there aging neighborhoods where children have grown up and moved out, but their parents are still there and aging in place? New residential construction like is going on the south side of town. New employers that have moved to town and brought new people to town, or if they're closing businesses and closing industries. That's what the data will show you. I don't have numbers for that, but the redistricting consultant will have that. Just as an aside, for Santa Fe, population has shifted southward. I don't think that's that's anything new. But over the last 20 years, you've seen the population center of Santa Fe shift from about Cerrillos Road in St. Francis to Cerrillos Road in St. Michael's. And what you'll probably see when the consultant comes in is the population center of Santa Fe, probably somewhere around Cerrillos Road and Carlos Rey or Siler this time around. So those are just trends you're going to see.
Madam President, just for the record, if I may, just for
Yeah,
my own.
go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Zamora. So who is counting the census? Obviously adult children, citizens. And so those are people that actually replied to the census, right?
Plus there's replies, plus there's also modeling that best predicts what the existing population is. It's not only people that reply, but the number that do reply help with their modeling and projections to establish population sizes.
And it's anybody who's here, so it's not just citizens.
Correct.
Okay,
that's correct. Thank you. Residents probably would be a better word for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so next slide, please. Great. So we have over time, we have court decisions, and the real phrase to think about while you're going through redistricting is one person, one vote. And so as a voter in an individual board member's district, I should be equally represented as any other person in any other board member's district. And that's why we need as equal a population as possible. And it used to be defined by the courts plus or minus 5%. And now it's a New Mexico statute. Next page, please. Great. So some deep concepts to go through quickly. But there are examples of making sure a minority population has an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. And for example, minorities such as Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanics, and you're looking for compact and large enough districts to constitute a majority in a single member district, maintaining political cohesiveness of a minority population, no dilution of voting strength, and no racial gerrymandering. That's when we're listening to the national news and what's going on nationally with Congress. I'm just introducing you to concepts you're going to see there. We don't really see those at the local school levels because they're 5 equal districts. Those things really don't come into play at a granular level. The district should have a compact geographic shape. Again, I'll show you your existing districts to show you how that is. They should be contiguous, as I mentioned, and they should keep together communities of interest, neighborhoods, geographic boundaries, respecting cultural or historic traditions, and similar considerations specific to school districts. And it's the only time I'm going to mention this phrasing is school boundaries. So a community of interest may actually be an area around particular elementary schools or middle schools or something of that sort. It's within the universe of consideration. None of this is intended to change those boundaries. This is, again, the boundaries for the 5 board members. And so you try and maintain a core of existing districts when you're redistricting, and you try and avoid pairing incumbents. But again, I'm going to show you some maps that could always bring that into play. Next slide, please. So just again, for the data wonks, I think it'll be important to have a working knowledge of this. Vice President Garcia has seen these numbers because of their presentations at the county. At the state level, first and foremost, here are the growth trends. From 1990 to 2000, 20%. New Mexico had significant growth. It dropped to 13% in 2010, 2.8% growth statewide over the last decade. So obviously we're seeing significant slowing of growth. And I'll go down a little bit lower on the next slide, please. So fortunately, Santa Fe County is in the growth slide and grew 7.4% in the last decade. That's the entire county. Our school district does not encompass the whole county, but countywide, we've got 7.4% population growth. So you can probably extrapolate similar numbers, if not slightly higher, within the school district boundaries. Okay, next slide. Was that it, Alma? Was that the end of my slides?
Sorry, I disconnected. Let me go ahead and move it. My apologies.
That's no problem. Actually, yeah, that's pretty much it. What I'm going to do, if you don't mind, I'm going to share screen at this moment. I have that last slide on my screen, but I'm going to show you two maps.
Yeah, can you let Gino
I think it's there.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so this is our final slide here. And of course, to the extent that Deputy Superintendent Yonda Wagner and Council Granata needs to jump in, please feel welcome to do so. But what I'm going to show you is these are the existing boundaries of the board districts. So you're seeing compactness, contiguity, and you're seeing how the boundary line sort of preserves some areas of interest throughout your district. Okay, so this obviously is a good example. The zoom in is to the right, and the larger picture, those are your school district. The boundaries, you see the overall boundary of the school district, and then the 5 districts within them. When I talked about the risk of redistricting causing 2 board members to be in the same district, I came up with these imaginary locations. Each star represents a board member. This board member in the green, most likely not at risk of any significant change. But as I mentioned, if the growth is southward from northeast to southwest, then some of these boundaries are going to move. So the star in the blue is right on a northeastern boundary. That's sort of at risk to shift. The star in the brown, same thing, possibly the star in the vanilla color and the star in the pink or the strawberry color. Okay, so that concludes that. I'm going to stop sharing. Alma, if you can bring up that last page. And then I stand for, certainly there's an opportunity for comments and input from Deputy Superintendent Yonda Wagner, Council Granata, and I also stand for questions from the board.
Sorry, go ahead, Christy.
I might just add, board president, board members, superintendent, our school boundaries do tend to shift some every few years based on development, right? Based on where students live and trying to balance enrollments. I don't see anything imminent that would collide with this work, but I just want you to bear that in mind, that we might want to look at some of those areas where we project some future growth and development, make sure there's wiggle room for if those school attendance boundaries should change before the next redistricting.
Okay, Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions from the board?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Vice President Garcia.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Zamora, good presentation, very short and simple. Good examples that you talk about the growth of Santa Fe County as a whole, which includes the city as well, Santa Fe County. Sometimes residents in Santa Fe County don't realize that the southern part of Santa Fe County, which is the town of Edgewood, is that where I-40 goes through Santa Fe County. But so whenever they look at the population growth of Santa Fe County, it's from I-40 all the way to Espanola, right? And so one of the other questions I have is, does it matter the number of schools per district? Or that has no point.
I will say for a school district, of course, the location of schools always matter. As far as the legal requirements, there is no legal requirement that a district contain X number of schools or X percentage of schools. But in the category of communities of interests, I think you can be a little bit mindful of, from my days inside Santa Fe Public Schools, I remember board members a lot saying, "Oh yeah, that's my high school. Oh yeah, that's my middle school in my district." And so it's for discussion whether the entirety of an area of a middle school should be in one board member or maybe get split between two board members for additional representation. But I recall those types of discussions, and in some ways that can be very a helpful consideration under the umbrella of communities of interest. But to answer your question, it's not a requirement.
Thank you, Madam President.
Other questions from the board?
Board President Noble.
Go ahead, Board Member Anderson.
Thank you, Board President Noble. What are our next steps? What do we do from here as a board?
Great question.
So Madam President, Member Anderson, very good question. You are in the middle of the year to accomplish this. So your next step really is to retain the redistricting consultant, follow the procurement process. It typically will not fall in the range of an RFP being required, but there's an option to get bids and get information, and your administration assists greatly with that, of course. So that really is step one. After you get that on board, there's a lot of scheduling beyond that.
I was just going to ask if we could, Superintendent, say, where are we on getting whatever we need to do for procurement to get a contractor on board?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, President Noble, members of the board. We have secured the funding for that. So now we're in the process of putting that together to secure an individual to help with our process.
And it'll be an RFP, some sort of bid process. Okay. Yes. Do we have any idea? Let's just go to when that will be completed.
We're hoping as soon as possible. We don't want to fall behind in this process. So we're working, hopefully having something in place for bid by the end of February.
Yes. And maybe, Gino, this is one for you. How can the board ensure that this process is done well? We don't do purchasing, obviously. So what's our role here?
Sure. Well, President Noble, the best way to do it really is through staff, and I've also been available to staff, providing examples of previous procurement that we've been involved with. And it's getting a good definition around the scope, and it's getting good distribution of that, and having the patience and the timelines to make that selection. Now, that said, out of 89 school districts, not all of them have individual member districts, but you're probably competing timeline-wise with about 60 school districts to do that during this calendar year. Yeah, so being ahead of the game, timing it, ensuring that you're maintaining the consultant's attention is going to be important. Now the difference between a 12,000 student or 12 to 14,000 student school district and their needs is going to be great versus a 1,000 student school district, which we have many of in this state. So, so again, being ahead of the game, getting the attention of the consultant, and also I would say being efficient with the community process. Ensure you engage the community, but I don't recommend, you know, a 6 or 8 month community input process. The consultant will help you schedule that, formulate it, make sure there's enough opportunity for community input, but it could be as brief as about a 2 month period, 2 to 2 month period.
And what you're talking about with community input is really vetting and reacting to some recommendations.
Correct. Giving an opportunity for communities of interest to express, whether it's within a particular district or as a whole to the entire board, to express their interests. Inevitably, you can't get this perfect, and lines are going to encroach on all of these topics that we've considered, and we always do our best. But we may have learned something from 10 years ago, having to parse maybe one community of interest in pieces, and now with growth, we might be able to unify them. Or we may have put 2 communities of interest together that we find 10 years later didn't work really well and didn't really well represent when they came together to elect representation.
And you said, you know, ensuring you have a good scope.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how the board does that.
Sure. So as I've shared with staff, President Noble, as I've shared with staff, I think over time it gets, I want to use a better word than cobbled together, but molded together, because what we know from 10 years ago, we've improved. And so we're adding just a little bit more. And what has worked in this school district, we can take some pieces there and bring it over here. So what I've shared with staff is actually a 2.5 page list of everything in it, kitchen sink scope, that can be molded for our community.
I don't doubt that you have good information or that we have good staff, but trying to draw out the board's role here, how we ensure we have a good scope.
I see.
I mean, aside from the fact that we have good counsel and good staff, you know, what's our role here? It's a version of the same question. And I'm so sorry, Board Member Anderson, if I hijacked your question.
Let's try and be succinct.
Okay.
Board President Noble, the board's role, the scope is broad, almost uniform. The board's role will be, when the consultant comes to you for that introductory meeting, to say, here's what our interests are. And when the consultant comes back with more data, draft maps, maybe some feedback along the line in the second meeting, the consultant's going to give information to the board and ask for direction on how to proceed. So at those stages, the board is going to have input. And with the community meetings, the board has the opportunity to listen, observe, and receive the feedback, not only for their district, but district-wide. So there is a lot of board engagement. Thank you for getting me to focus a little bit more on where the board engagement is. And then ultimately, it is the board's decision. The board will vote on one map with 5 new member districts.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Secretary Bozay.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. Just to follow up a little bit on your question about the community engagement, for clarity, is that something that we could start anytime, or is that specifically in response to the first set of proposed maps that were given from the consultant?
Sure. So President Noble, Secretary Bozay, it can be a little bit fluid, but the as far as timing, you're going to want the redistricting consultant engaged in those community meetings, helping structure them, run them, take in the information. And so those meetings come after bringing in the redistricting. Are best when they come in after the redistricting consultant. And then from there, they're going to collect the information and report it back to you. And you can process that. Again, I'll caution against 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of let's send it back. At some point, a decision needs to be made. But there are opportunities to say, okay, learn something new, something dramatically different that's going to spin us around a little bit. But you will get in meetings 2 and 3 at least, drafts and redrafts of maps. And there will be discussion of maps, and the consultant will actually state a basis for here's the data that supports map A, map B, map C, here's some alternatives, and feedback from these community meetings show how A represents this interest, B represents that interest, and C represents the other.
Wonderful, thank you. It's great to hear that the consultant is well-versed in how to facilitate these meetings with the community. That is very reassuring to me that they'll be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. For data nerds like me, I enjoy sitting in those meetings. I really do.
Oh, I'm excited about it. I just don't want to have to, be the sole person in charge of it. So
very good.
I'm a data nerd and I appreciate the experts.
And Board Member Anderson, again, I apologize if I was trying to pin Gina down. Okay, well, and I think part of the point is we need a good consultant. There's some competition for this work because so many districts and other local governments have to do this at this time. So getting that out in a timely manner, and then a good consultant lets the data lead.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see what we learn from the data, President Noble. Sometimes we don't like what we learn from the data, but it's important to have it. And I'll tell you, for everyone on the line, it is an interesting process. The community meetings aren't always highly attended. And I think that's because they don't know what they're missing out on. And I hope that a Zoom world gives more people an opportunity, because what I learned 10 years ago through census data and the redistricting process of the city and the population numbers, it has shaped how I've advised clients throughout the last 10 years. And so it's just good information to know. Principles for your principals, for your senior staff. It really is good information to know.
Yeah. And I really look forward to that. But just to be clear, the 5 districts for elected board members that we're doing, that's, you know, we may have an eye on some of the schools, but that's what we're doing. And it's voters, not students. Or it's population, sorry, it's not voters, it's population, not voters or students.
Correct. It is population, children through adults.
So the demographics, as we might see, if we have an older population in our northern eastern regions of Santa Fe, it doesn't matter if folks are older versus child rearing. In other words, if they're grandparents versus parents, doesn't matter. They're still people, still counted.
That's correct. And what you'll see with the data is information like that. Where is population growing faster? Where is population growing slower, or in some instances shrinking? We saw shrinkage within city boundaries 10 years ago, and we also saw dramatic increase within areas of city boundaries. But I'm not going to predict any of that. The data speaks for itself when that comes, and that'll be very interesting for you when you do see it.
Madam President, just one last comment for myself.
Go ahead.
I think we have some good staff. Christie's actually, we've done a facilities master plan many years ago, which actually had some growth projections in it, which is really a good document that our consultants can utilize. And then also, Mr. Zamora, I really appreciate your nameplate there on your left-hand side. I like that.
That for us?
Yeah, it is. President Noble, Vice President Garcia, old habits die hard. I'm very proud of that nameplate. It's up there every day, not just for this meeting.
Oh, okay.
It's up there every day.
Thank you.
Madam President,
Yeah, go ahead.
just quickly to talk about that facility master plan, it was most recently done last year. So there's very recent information that we can share with the consultant if that's relevant.
Very good.
Board President Noble, if I may, for just a quick second to touch upon the next steps. Mr. Zamora mentioned that we need to get a consultant, and I just want to make clear that we're not going to have to go to the RFP process. I guess assuming that it's not going to cost over $60,000. As Mr. Zamora indicated, it's around 20 to 30,000, and so he's provided us with some contacts, and so we will be reaching out shortly to try to secure a consultant as soon as possible to get things rolling.
Wonderful. That answers my question. Thank you. Any other questions, last thoughts before Gino goes and, gets dinner, lives his civilized life?
It's going to be Tomasitas tonight. I'm sorry to tell everybody.
Just rub it in.
Yeah, right.
Sorry,
okay.
Pizza, because I think that's what I'm having.
He said Tomasitas.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was hoping I missed.
A little different.
Yeah.
I'll take anything right about now.
Yeah.
Thank you all, and I also do want to thank Superintendent Chavez, who's been keeping us focused on this and making sure that we had everything on track in time for tonight's presentation and getting this done as promptly as is reasonable.
Well, we appreciate your responsiveness and clarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Gino. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Christy. Appreciate it. At this stage, 3.5 hours in, I'm going to suggest we stop. We have one more really meaty presentation. I would suggest that we can address this one at another time, and with the sort of thinking that the redistricting is the part that is on a particular timeline, and it will be a first step in getting us a lot of good quantitative data about our district. and that we might want to save our creative, innovative, out of the box discussions on reimagining for a time when we haven't been going for 3.5 hours, and many of us have worked a pretty long day before that. And of course, we're going to spend some time together this weekend in our special meeting. So my suggestion would be that we reschedule the next piece at another time. I'm seeing enthusiasm from Carmen, a thumbs up from Rudy and Sasha, and Sarah, also a thumbs up. All right, that
I'm
seems
good with
okay.
whatever you decide.
Okay, that seems, we need to remember to be humane to ourselves too. So thank you all. It was also brought to my attention earlier that we apparently, I think, contrary to our collective board understanding, the particulars of our consent agenda were a motion to approve a contract. So I'm going to ask that we go back, and I'm going to say right now that I would like to make a motion to approve the entirety of our consent agenda.
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Anderson. Is there anything further we need to discuss on the consent agenda and our cleanup vote on this? Okay, seeing none, we'll do a roll call on approving the consent agenda. Vice President Garcia,
Yes.
Secretary Bozet,
Yes.
Dr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
and I also vote yes. So there we are. Now, of course, last but not least, advanced planning. As a reminder, we have a special meeting with an executive session on Saturday at 2 p.m. This will be in person at 610 Alta Vista. We are going to be masked and distanced, but able to speak together. And Superintendent, I will ask you to jump in if there's anything you need or want from the board, or if you have any questions, or Ms. Bahar as well. And I will say that I believe Ms. Bahar is going to share. I think we all have the materials to review ahead of time that the superintendent sent. So let's do that and come prepared, and hopefully we can be efficient and effective on Saturday. Anything on that from anybody? Superintendent, you're good?
We're ready.
Okay, and you'll be there, and we will have you leave the room and come back and as needed, right? You'll be in the building, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Just literally in the building. Okay. And then our next regular meeting is set for February 3rd. I'm also hoping, and we can talk about this the next time if anybody objects, but I'm hoping that maybe we can begin our study sessions a little later, either at 4:30 or 5 for those of us that are working, and hopefully we won't always go 3.5 hours. Hopefully we won't do that really ever again. Anyway, so we can talk about that, but I'm hoping we can shift our study session time to start a bit later. I know that sometimes that does increase the burden on staff. But for those of us that have jobs, it is sometimes hard to begin at 4 on a Thursday. Okay, anything else on advanced planning? Seeing none. As the mayor would say, for the good of the order, anything else at all? Then we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. I'll see you board members and superintendent on Saturday, and we'll see the rest of you on February 3rd. Thanks so much.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.